Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I never thought I'd be the kind of person sharing a story like this. For years, I kept it to myself because honestly, who'd believe me? But it's been weighing on me for so long, and after reading others' similar experiences, I figure it's time. This happened back in the fall of '83, when I was a junior at IU. I'd managed to rent this A-frame house on Low Gap Road, right on the edge of Morgan Monroe State Forest in Indiana. It was perfect, cheap rent, because it was out in the middle of nowhere, plenty of space, and surrounded by beautiful woods. The first week of classes had just ended, and a bunch of us were celebrating the new school year. That night started out totally normal. There were 6 of us hanging out, drinking beers, playing cards, and just bullshitting about professors and classes. Around 1:30 in the morning, most of my friends were pretty drunk, getting loud, and I needed some air. I stepped out onto the deck to cool off and clear my head a bit. It was a clear night with a full moon, so bright you could see everything almost like daytime, just with that silvery moonlight glow. I remember leaning against the railing, looking out at the woods behind the house, feeling pretty content with my little spot in the world. That's when I noticed movement near my trash cans. At first, I thought it was just an opossum or raccoon. We got them all the time out there. Sure enough, there was an opossum waddling around, probably looking for scraps. But then something else caught my eye further back, on the trail that ran about 50 yards behind the house. Something was walking down that trail. My first thought was, who the hell is hiking through these woods at this hour? I figured maybe it was some drunk college kid who'd gotten lost, but as I focused on it, something felt off. This thing was walking on 2 legs, but it didn't move right. It was big, too big for a person. I'm 6'1", and this thing had to be at least 7 or 8 feet tall. What really got me was the way it moved. It had these unusually long arms that hung down, but they didn't swing naturally like a person's would, and its head, or what should have been its head, seemed to sit directly on its shoulders. No neck, just this massive hulking silhouette moving through the moonlight. I stood there frozen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The rational part of my brain was saying, it's just someone in a fur coat. But deep down, I knew that wasn't right. The proportions were all wrong. The gait was wrong. Everything about it was just wrong. When it disappeared into a thicker patch of trees, I snapped out of it and rushed back inside. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely close the sliding glass door. "Guys," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need you all to go to the back bedroom and lock the door." Of course, they laughed at first, thought I was joking, but something in my face must have convinced them because they stopped laughing pretty quick. "What's going on, Mark?" my buddy Steve asked. "There's something outside. Something big. Just, please, go to the bedroom and lock the door until I figure this out." They must have heard the fear in my voice because they didn't argue. Once they were secure in the back room, I went to my closet and pulled out my Remington shotgun. My dad had given it to me for protection since I was living so far out in the woods. I'd never imagined actually needing it. I loaded it with trembling hands, flicked on the porch light, and stepped back outside. The opossum was long gone. Everything was quiet, too quiet. No frogs, no insects, nothing. Just this heavy, eerie silence hanging over everything. I scanned the tree line, looking for any movement. For a minute, I thought maybe whatever it was had moved on. Then I saw it. A large, dark shape standing at the edge of the forest, about 30 feet from my deck. It was partially hidden behind a tree, but I could make out its massive outline in the moonlight. I raised my shotgun, pointed it in that direction, and yelled, "Hey, get out of here!" My voice cracked embarrassingly, but I was beyond caring. The shape didn't move, didn't run, didn't even flinch. It just stood there, watching. I could feel it looking at me, though I couldn't make out any eyes. That's when the fear turned to panic. I fired a warning shot into the air. The blast echoed through the trees, but the figure still didn't move. So I aimed lower, not directly at it, but close enough to scare it off, and fired again. That's when it happened. The thing made this sound, not quite a scream, not quite a growl, something so primal it made the hair on my neck stand up. Then it crashed through the undergrowth, branches snapping as it retreated deeper into the forest. The sound of it moving through the woods seemed to go on forever, getting fainter until finally there was nothing. I stayed on the deck for another hour, shotgun ready, listening for any sign of its return. Nothing came. Eventually, I went back inside, told my friends it was safe, but didn't give them details. Just said I'd scared off a bear or something. None of us slept that night. As soon as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I went outside to investigate. The ground was still wet with dew, and I found my shell casings easily enough. Then I walked to where the figure had been standing. The grass was flattened in a large area, much larger than what a person would make, and there was a distinct trail leading back into the woods. Broken branches, disturbed vegetation, clear signs that something big had moved through there recently. I followed the trail, shotgun still in hand. It led to a well-established path I'd never noticed before, despite having hiked all through these woods. What was strange about this path was how it made these sharp jogs around low-hanging branches. It didn't go under them like a human trail would. It went around them, suggesting whatever used this trail was too tall to duck underneath. The path wound up the ridge behind my house, and I followed it for about a quarter mile until it ended at a bare spot on the ridge top. The ground there was softer, muddier, and what I saw made my stomach drop. Footprints. Not animal tracks, but human-like footprints of different sizes. Some were clearly smaller, maybe belonging to juveniles, but one set was massive, over 20 inches long, with 5 distinct toes. They were pressed deep into the mud, suggesting whatever made them was incredibly heavy. Standing in that clearing, I realized something that chilled me even more. From this vantage point, you could see my entire property. The A-frame was clearly visible through a gap in the trees. This spot provided a perfect view of my house, my deck, the driveway, everything. Whatever I'd encountered hadn't just been passing through. It had been watching me, maybe for days or weeks. I hurried back to the house, packed my friends up, and we all went into town for breakfast. I didn't tell them what I'd found. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. But over the next few weeks, I started researching local folklore, talking to some of the old-timers at the general store down the road, even reaching out to the forestry department. Turns out there had been similar reports in Morgan Monroe State Forest going back decades. Stories of tall, hairy creatures seen at a distance, strange howls in the night, footprints found in remote areas. Most people dismissed these as myths or misidentifications, but after what I'd seen, I wasn't so sure. I stayed in that house for the rest of the school year, but I never felt comfortable there again. I'd wake up at night thinking I heard heavy footsteps on the deck. Sometimes I'd find my trash cans disturbed in ways raccoons couldn't manage. Once I swear I saw eyes reflecting light from the edge of the woods, too high up to be any normal animal. I never shot at it again. Something told me I'd gotten lucky that first night, that whatever it was had just been curious, not aggressive. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched whenever I was outside after dark. Before I moved out the following spring, a local guy who'd heard about my experience through the grapevine took me aside at the hardware store. "What you saw," he said quietly, "my grandfather called them forest people, said they'd been here longer than us, said they just want to be left alone." He wouldn't say more, just gave me a knowing look and walked away. I've spent years trying to rationalize what happened that night. Could it have been a person in some kind of suit? Maybe, but that doesn't explain the footprints or the established trail. A bear? No way. It was clearly bipedal and moved nothing like a bear. Some other known animal? Nothing native to Indiana fits what I saw. The only conclusion that makes any sense, as crazy as it sounds, is that I encountered what some people call a Sasquatch or Bigfoot. I'm not saying that's definitely what it was. I'm just saying I can't come up with a better explanation. I've never gone public with this story until now. The fear of ridicule was too strong, but I've been reading other accounts that sound so similar to mine that I can't keep dismissing them. Maybe by sharing this, I can contribute something to understanding these elusive creatures, whatever they are. All I know for certain is this. Something was watching my house from the woods that night in '83. Something that walked on two legs, but wasn't human. Something that left footprints over 20 inches long. And to this day, I still can't explain exactly what it was. Story 2. I've never shared this with many people for fear of being laughed at, but what happened at our cottage in Haliburton still haunts me to this day. I need to get this off my chest. It was August 2006, just days after those nasty tornadoes tore through the area. My husband Mike, our friend Carol and I had gone up to our cottage for what was supposed to be a relaxing weekend away from the city. We'd owned the property for about 7 years by then. Nothing fancy, just a little 2-bedroom place on 3 acres backing onto Crown land, but it was our escape. The weather had finally cleared up after the storms, and we were looking forward to sitting by the fire pit and maybe doing some fishing in the lake. Our dog Charlie, a normally chill golden retriever, came with us as always. He loved the cottage more than we did, I swear. We arrived Friday afternoon around 4. Everything seemed normal at first. We unpacked the car, opened up the cottage, and Mike got the power and water going while Carol and I wiped down the counters and swept up the usual dead flies. Charlie did his usual property patrol, sniffing around the perimeter like he was checking security. Normal cottage stuff. It was around 7 in the evening when I first noticed Charlie acting weird. We were outside getting the fire started for dinner, and he kept pacing back and forth along the tree line behind the cottage. He'd stop, ears perked up, staring into the woods, then whine and come back to us before repeating the whole thing again. I called him over a few times, but he was distracted, which wasn't like him at all. "What's up with Charlie?" Carol asked, as she was arranging the chairs around the fire. "No idea. Maybe he smells a raccoon or something," I said, not thinking much of it. About 20 minutes later, Carol wrinkled her nose and said, "God, what is that smell? Did someone not make it to the outhouse?" I smelled it too then, this awful pungent odor like really strong human waste, mixed with something musky and wild. It was disgusting. Mike joked that maybe the septic tank was backing up, but we knew that wasn't it. The smell seemed to be coming from the northwest corner of our property, where the trees got thicker as they extended into the Crown land. Charlie started growling then, not his usual "there's a squirrel" bark, but a deep, throaty growl I'd never heard from him before. The hair on his back was standing straight up, and he was fixed on that same northwest direction. "Charlie, come here, boy," Mike called, sounding concerned now. Charlie wouldn't budge. Then we heard it, this loud crack like someone had snapped a massive branch, not like a twig breaking under a rabbit's foot, but like something really heavy had stepped on a fallen tree and broken it clean through. The sound echoed across our property. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, feeling my heart racing. Mike grabbed the big maglite we keep at the cottage and shined it toward the tree line. "Probably just a deer," he said, but I could tell he didn't believe it. The light revealed nothing but trees and underbrush, though the shadows seemed to move in ways that made me uneasy. We called Charlie inside after that. He wouldn't settle down, pacing from window to window, occasionally letting out these low growls. None of us said it, but we were all on edge. We stayed up later than planned, nobody wanting to be the first to suggest going to bed. When we finally did turn in around midnight, I made sure all the windows and doors were locked, something I rarely bothered with at the cottage. I barely slept. Charlie stayed at the foot of our bed instead of in his usual spot in the living room, and every creak and groan of the cottage had me wide awake. Around 3 in the morning, I swear I heard heavy footsteps on the gravel path beside the cottage, but I was too scared to look out the window. I nudged Mike, but he just mumbled something and rolled over. I lay there frozen until morning light started filtering through the curtains. By morning, the smell had mostly dissipated. Charlie seemed calmer too, though still not his usual self. We tried to laugh off our uneasiness over coffee on the back deck. That's when Carol, who'd gone to grab more sugar from inside, came rushing back out. "You guys need to see this," she said, her face pale. We followed her around to the side of the cottage, between the building and the tree line. There, pressed into the soft ground where we'd cleared some brush last summer, were 2 enormous footprints. I just stood there, coffee mug halfway to my lips, staring. They were clearly foot-shaped, not a bear paw or any animal track I'd ever seen. They were just feet, human-shaped but massive. "That's weird," I said, trying to sound casual. "Maybe Joel from next door wandered over." Our neighbor Joel sometimes came by when he saw we were up, though usually not without calling first. Mike snorted. "Joel wears shoes, Sarah, and his feet aren't the size of snowshoes." To demonstrate, Mike, who wears a size 12, placed his foot inside one of the prints. His foot looked child-sized in comparison. It didn't reach the edges in any direction. The print was easily 16 inches long and incredibly deep, like whatever made it was carrying significant weight. "Could someone be messing with us?" Carol suggested, looking around nervously. But the prints were just those 2, like whatever made them had stepped over from the trees, then, what? Disappeared? There were no other tracks leading away, just those 2 perfect impressions. I felt sick to my stomach. The fear from the night before came rushing back, along with the memory of that awful smell. I couldn't help connecting it to the strange things we'd noticed over the past year, like the time we found those large bass washed up on our little beach, each with a single bite taken out of it, too big for any normal predator fish in the lake, or the way the bird feeders would be completely emptied overnight, sometimes with the feeder itself damaged. We spent the rest of the morning in an uneasy silence. Mike took photos of the footprints with our digital camera, measuring them against his boot. Carol kept suggesting rational explanations, each less convincing than the last. Charlie refused to go near that side of the cottage. Around noon, our neighbor Don from down the road stopped by. Don's lived in Haliburton his whole life, knows everything about local wildlife. He's in his 70s, full of stories about the area. "Saw your car was here," he said cheerfully. "Thought I'd check how you fared in the storms." We showed him the footprints. I expected him to laugh or tell us it was just a bear walking funny. Instead, he got real quiet, studying them with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You folks hear anything unusual last night?" he finally asked. Mike mentioned the cracking sound and Charlie's behavior. Don nodded slowly. "Seen lots of things on your property over the years," Don said. "Bears in the spring, family of moose last fall. Even a lynx once. Beautiful creatures." He paused, still looking at the prints. "Some things, though, better not to see." He wouldn't elaborate further, just advised us to make lots of noise when we're outside and keep the property well lit at night. As he was leaving, he casually mentioned that the area had lots of history and that not all old stories are just stories. That was it for me. After Don left, I told Mike I wanted to go home early. The cottage had always been my happy place, somewhere I felt safe. Now I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound from the woods. We packed up and left by 3 that afternoon. The whole drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints, about Charlie's behavior, about Don's cryptic comments. When we got back to Toronto, I started researching online. looking up unexplained phenomena in the Haliburton area, large unidentified creatures, anything that might explain what we'd encountered. I found surprisingly little official information, but plenty of forum posts and local legends, people in nearby areas reporting strange smells, unusual sounds in the forest, livestock acting nervous. One account from a hunter described finding deer carcasses high up in trees, placed there by something strong enough to lift a full-grown deer 15 feet off the ground. A week later, Carol called me. She'd been talking to her cousin, who has a place on Eels Lake, not far from our cottage. Apparently, her cousin and his buddies had been fishing late one evening last summer when they heard something moving through the forest that sounded like a dinosaur. Heavy footfalls and breaking branches, but too large to be a bear or moose. They'd packed up and left immediately, not wanting to find out what it was. I couldn't shake the fear. 2 weeks after our experience, I contacted a real estate agent about possibly selling the cottage. The agent seemed surprised. Lakefront property in Haliburton doesn't come up often, and we'd always talked about keeping it in the family. When she asked why, I mumbled something about commute times and maintenance costs. I couldn't bring myself to say, because I think there's something in those woods that doesn't want us there. Mike convinced me to hold off on selling. We've been back to the cottage a few times since then, but never alone and never without feeling watched. I make sure we're inside before dark, and Charlie stays on a leash when he's outside. I've never seen those footprints again, but sometimes, especially after rain or when the wind is coming from the northwest, that smell returns briefly. That unmistakable, pungent odor that makes Charlie whine and hide under the bed. I don't know what visited our property that August night. I don't want to know. Whatever walked through our yard, whatever left those massive footprints, it was something that shouldn't exist in our rational world. Something that makes me question everything I thought I knew about the wilderness around us. Sometimes when I'm alone at the cottage now, I swear I can feel eyes watching me from the tree line. And occasionally, in the deep quiet of the night, I hear something large moving through the underbrush, branches snapping under its weight as it passes by our little cottage in the woods. Story 3. Dots. I still can't explain what I saw that day. I've told this story to a few people close to me, but most just give me that look. You know the one. I don't blame them. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. Twice. It all started in June of 2005. I was driving back from visiting my sister in Lock Haven, taking the scenic route through Renovo. It was almost dusk, that time when the light gets all weird and shadows start playing tricks on you. I had my window down, enjoying the summer air and the smell of the forest. This road cuts through some pretty dense woods, and there's hardly any traffic, especially on weekdays. I remember I was just coming around this bend in the road when I saw it. Right there at the edge of the trees, maybe 15 yards from the shoulder, this massive, dark figure. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. Was it a bear standing up? But no, this thing was huge, easily over 7 feet tall. It was covered in dark hair, not fur exactly, but longer hair. The color was this deep, dark brown, almost black in the fading light. The thing that stuck with me was how it just stood there, completely still, watching me drive by. It didn't run or seem startled. It just observed. I hit the brakes and slowed down, trying to get a better look, but by then it had stepped back into the tree line. I pulled over and sat there for a good 5 minutes, heart pounding, but it never reappeared. I drove home in a daze, questioning what I'd seen. Maybe it was just a shadow or my mind playing tricks, but deep down, I knew what I'd seen. I just didn't want to say the word, even to myself. Bigfoot. It sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'd always been skeptical about that sort of thing. Cryptids, monsters, all that. But now I wasn't so sure. I needed to go back. I needed to know if what I saw was real. A week later, I convinced my buddy John to come with me. John's always been into outdoor stuff, hunting, fishing, camping, and I figured if anyone would be open-minded about this, it'd be him. He brought his 12-year-old son along, which I wasn't thrilled about initially, but the kid was on summer break and bored out of his mind. Plus, I honestly didn't think we'd see anything. I just wanted to show them where it happened, maybe look for tracks or something. We drove out there around 4 in the afternoon. It was a clear day, warm but not hot, with a light breeze rustling through the trees. I pulled over at almost the exact spot where I'd had my sighting the week before. "This is it," I told them, pointing to the tree line. I was driving along and it was just standing right there, watching the road. John nodded, scanning the area with interest. His son seemed more preoccupied with his Game Boy than any potential monster sighting. "How big did you say it was?" John asked. "Huge, like basketball player huge, but broader. I only saw it for maybe 10 seconds, but I swear it was looking right at me." We got out of the car and walked to the edge of the road. There was a slight embankment leading down to the forest floor, maybe a 5-foot drop. The woods were typical Pennsylvania forest, lots of oak and maple, some pine, fairly dense underbrush in spots. "Let's take a quick look around," John suggested. "Maybe there's some kind of sign it was here." We were just about to head down into the trees when we heard it, a subtle shifting sound, like something large moving carefully through the undergrowth. Not the random rustling of a squirrel or bird, but deliberate movement. John froze, putting his hand out to stop his son. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. We all stood perfectly still, listening. The sound had come from deeper in the woods, maybe 30 or 40 yards away. That's when I saw it again. Just a silhouette at first, partially hidden behind a large oak tree. It was leaning against the trunk, as if trying to conceal itself, but it was simply too big to hide completely. Even from that distance, I could tell it was the same creature I'd seen before. "John," I whispered, pointing, "look there, by that big tree." His eyes followed my finger, and I saw the moment he spotted it. His face went slack, eyes widening. "Holy shit," he breathed. "Dad, what is it?" his son asked, trying to see what we were looking at. "Just stay still," John told him quietly. "Don't make any sudden movements." We watched as the creature's arm moved ever so slowly, up toward its face and then back down. The movement was so deliberate, so controlled, it sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't an animal acting on instinct. This was calculated. I needed a better view. There was a slight rise where we'd parked, and I realized if I got on top of my car, I'd have a clearer line of sight. Without taking my eyes off the figure, I backed up to my Honda and carefully climbed onto the hood, then up to the roof. From this vantage point, I could see it much better. Any doubt I had evaporated instantly. This wasn't a shadow or a trick of the light. It was solid. It was real. The creature stood at least 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a massive barrel-shaped chest. Its hair seemed to cover its entire body, though I couldn't make out facial features from that distance. "Can you see it better?" John called up, his voice hushed. "Yeah," I answered, not taking my eyes off it. "It's just standing there, watching us." Then something happened that made my blood run cold. To the right of the large creature, maybe 15 feet away, a second figure emerged from behind a cluster of saplings. This one was smaller, maybe 6.5 feet tall, but unmistakably the same type of creature. It was fully visible, not hiding behind anything, and it moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something its size. "John, there's another one!" I hissed down to them. "To the right!" The smaller creature was walking slowly, deliberately, moving through a section of thinner trees toward a denser part of the forest. Unlike the larger one, which remained partially concealed, this one was completely exposed. Its body was covered in the same dark hair, slightly reddish-brown in the afternoon light. Its arms hung long at its sides, reaching almost to its knees. Something in me snapped. Fear gave way to a desperate curiosity. Without thinking, I jumped down from the car and started running toward the embankment. "What are you doing?" John shouted after me, but I was already sliding down the slope into the woods. The smaller creature was moving away at a casual pace, as if unconcerned about my presence. I crashed through the underbrush, my heart hammering in my chest. I wasn't even sure what I planned to do if I caught up to it, take a picture with my phone, try to communicate. The rational part of my brain had completely shut down. I was gaining on it somehow. It continued its unhurried pace while I ran full tilt through the trees. When I got within about 20 yards, it turned its head slightly, just enough to look back at me with one eye. I'll never forget that moment. Its eye caught the sunlight filtering through the trees, reflecting back with an amber glow. That's when it decided I was too close. In an instant, its casual stroll transformed into a sprint that defied everything I thought I knew about how creatures move. Its gait was strange. It lifted its elbows high as it ran, almost like a person running while holding their arms bent at the elbow, but the speed was incredible. It covered ground with impossible efficiency, barely disturbing the underbrush as it went. I tried to keep up, but within seconds, it had doubled the distance between us. I followed as best I could, crashing through bushes and stumbling over fallen logs. Then suddenly the ground dropped away. There was an unexpected slope I hadn't seen, and I nearly fell headlong down it. I managed to catch myself on a tree trunk, but when I looked up, the creature was gone, vanished into the deeper woods without a sound. I stood there, gasping for breath, trying to process what had just happened. The woods had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, just my own ragged breathing and pounding heart. After a minute or two, I turned and made my way back toward the road, still shaking. When I got back, John and his son were standing exactly where I'd left them, staring into the woods with stunned expressions. "Did you see where it went?" John asked immediately. "It took off when I got close. Too fast to keep up with," I panted, hands on my knees. "What about the big one, the one by the tree?" John shook his head slowly. "It was still there after you ran off. We watched it the whole time. It raised its hand up to its face like it was, I don't know, smelling the air or something. Then it lowered it again." "A truck drove by while you were gone," his son added, finally finding his voice. "The thing turned its head to watch it, then looked back at us." "How long was I gone?" I asked. "Maybe 5 minutes," John said. "After the truck passed, it just wasn't there anymore. It never moved from behind the tree, at least not that we could see. It just disappeared. We stayed there for another hour, searching the area where we'd seen them. We found some broken branches and what might have been footprints in a muddy patch, but nothing conclusive. No hair samples, no clear tracks. It was like they'd never been there at all." The drive back was mostly silent. John's son fell asleep in the back seat, the excitement having worn him out. John and I exchanged theories in hushed tones. "You think they were watching us the whole time?" he asked at one point. "Probably," I said. "The way they moved, how careful they were. They knew exactly what they were doing. And there were 2 of them, different sizes." "Parent and child," I suggested. John nodded slowly. "Makes sense. The little one, and I can't believe I'm calling a 7-foot creature little, seemed younger somehow, the way it moved. I've been back to that spot a few times since then, always with someone else, but we've never seen anything again. I've researched Bigfoot sightings in the area and found a few reports from over the years, though nothing as detailed as what we experienced. I still don't know what to make of it all. I'm not a cryptid hunter or a paranormal enthusiast. I'm just a regular guy who saw something I can't explain. 2 somethings, actually. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was all some kind of shared hallucination or misidentification. But then I remember the way the smaller one looked back at me, that amber eye reflecting the sunlight, and I know what I saw was real. Whatever is out there in the woods near Renovo, it's intelligent. It's watching. And sometimes, if you're in the right place at the right time, it lets itself be seen. Story. I've been hesitant to share this for over 30 years now. Most of my friends and family have heard bits and pieces, but I've never written it all down. What happened to me in the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains back in June of '88 fundamentally changed how I see the wilderness. I've been an outdoorsman my entire life, hunting, fishing, camping since I was old enough to walk, but nothing prepared me for what I encountered that night. It was supposed to be a simple solo camping trip. I'd been to this area dozens of times, about 30 miles west of Bishop, California. I knew the terrain like the back of my hand. I had set up my tent near a small creek, maybe 50 yards from an old Ranger Snow Survey cabin that was empty this time of year. The spot was perfect, sheltered, good access to water, and far enough from the main trails that I wouldn't be bothered. That evening, I was just relaxing at my campsite after a day of hiking. It was around 9 p.m., just getting dark, and I had my shortwave radio on pretty loud, something I regret now. I was listening to some international station, enjoying the peace and quiet otherwise. The temperature was dropping, but it was still comfortable enough to sit outside. That's when I heard it. A scream, but not any normal scream I'd ever heard before. It was, God, it's hard to describe even now. It was deep, guttural, but also somehow piercing, like it started in a barrel and then shot through the air like a knife. It couldn't have been more than 100 feet away, just beyond my line of sight past that ranger cabin. The sound made every hair on my body stand straight up. My stomach instantly knotted. I've heard mountain lions scream. I've heard bears roar. Hell, I've heard people in serious distress. This wasn't like any of those things. This was something else entirely, primal and absolutely terrifying. The logical part of my brain immediately tried to categorize it. Bear? No way. Mountain lion? Definitely not. Elk? Not even close. Some poor hiker in trouble. That seemed impossible given the inhuman quality of the sound. I should have stayed put. Every instinct was screaming at me to get in my tent, zip it up, and wait until morning. But 30 years of wilderness experience and stupid male pride kicked in. I grabbed my 6-volt flashlight, a good sturdy one, but suddenly it felt pathetically inadequate, and headed toward where I'd heard the scream. The beam of light wobbled with my shaking hand as I approached the area beyond the ranger cabin. The forest was dead quiet now. No crickets, no nightbirds, nothing. Just complete silence, which anyone who spends time outdoors knows is a bad sign. That's when I saw it, or rather, caught a glimpse of it running toward the creek. Even in that brief flash of light, I could tell it was massive, massively tall, massively broad, moving in a way that was both incredibly fast, yet somehow wrong. Not like a bear moves, not like anything I'd ever seen before. I immediately regretted my decision to investigate. Every cell in my body was screaming danger. What I saw was only visible for maybe 2 seconds in my flashlight beam, but the image is burned into my memory. A dark figure, covered in what looked like dark reddish-brown hair, moving on 2 legs toward the water. I couldn't see a face, thank God, but I saw enough to know this thing was easily over 7 feet tall. And that's a conservative estimate. It could have been bigger. The sound it made crashing through the pine trees and brush by the creek was like nothing I'd heard before, not like a bear or deer moving through undergrowth. It was powerful, deliberate, and somehow intelligent sounding. I know that sounds crazy, but that's the only way I can describe it. I backed away slowly, then turned and half ran, half walked back to my campsite, trying not to make too much noise. My mind was racing. I kept my flashlight off once I got back, not wanting to draw attention. I sat in my tent, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then I noticed the smell. It had been there before, but in my panicked state I'd somehow ignored it. A powerful, musty odor like rotting oranges mixed with wet dog and something else I couldn't identify. It seemed to get stronger over the next few hours. Sometimes it would fade, then suddenly intensify, as if whatever was out there was moving around my camp. I felt watched. Not in some vague paranoid way, but in a specific targeted way that I've never felt before or since. Like something intelligent was studying me, trying to figure out what I was and what I was doing there. Throughout the night, I heard movement. First on one side of my camp, then mysteriously on the other, as if it was circling me. Occasionally branches would snap. Not small twigs, but sounds like substantial branches breaking under significant weight. Around midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I built up my fire as big as I dared, hoping it would keep whatever was out there at bay. The fire seemed to work. The sounds retreated somewhat, though never completely disappeared. I managed to doze off for maybe an hour total that night. In short, fitful bursts. When dawn finally came, I was exhausted but determined to look for evidence. I searched around my campsite and the area where I'd seen the figure. The ground was mostly pine needles and rocky soil, not great for tracks. Near the creek, I found some areas where it looked like something had splashed through the water, and oddly, some plants that seemed to have been pulled up and placed on a nearby stump, not scattered or eaten like an animal would do, but deliberately placed there, almost like a marker. That afternoon, I was packing up my gear. There was no way I was spending another night there, when a group of horseback riders came through. We got to talking, and it turned out they had passed by my area just before I heard that scream the previous night. When I cautiously mentioned the sound, one of the older riders looked at me strangely and said, "Might have been a Bigfoot. They've been known to make themselves heard when they want people out of their territory." I laughed it off at the time, but the comment stuck with me. On my way out, I stopped at the Forest Service station to report what I'd heard and seen, trying to keep my description factual without sounding crazy. The ranger I spoke with seemed unsurprised. He told me that just a week earlier, a backpacker had reported his food mysteriously disappearing from where he'd hung it in a tree, a good 7 feet off the ground. The plastic covering hadn't been torn apart like a bear would do. It had been stretched apart, and one bag of food was completely missing, with no signs of animal damage found anywhere. What struck me was the way the Forest Service employees exchanged glances when I carefully mentioned the possibility of Sasquatch, not dismissive looks, but knowing ones. That experience changed me. I began connecting it with uneasy feelings I'd had on previous trips that I'd dismissed, times when I felt watched or heard strange noises I couldn't identify. About a year later, I heard about a Sasquatch sighting near my favorite quail hunting spot in the Traverse Ranges. Curiosity got the better of me, and I went to investigate. While there, I heard distinctive banging sounds and high-pitched whistles that sent chills down my spine. I'd heard similar sounds before in Kern County, but had written them off. 5 years after my encounter, I met a local who lived near my campsite location. Without prompting, he told me that he and his elderly mother had seen what he described as a 9-foot-tall red Bigfoot in the same general area where I'd had my experience. He had no reason to lie to me. He didn't even know about my encounter until after he shared his story. I've spent the last 3 decades trying to make sense of what happened that night. I've read everything I can find on Sasquatch sightings, joined online forums, even gone back to those mountains several times, always with groups, never alone. I've never had another encounter that clear, though I've had moments where that same feeling of being watched returned. I don't have physical evidence. I don't have photos. All I have is what I saw, heard, and felt that night in June of '88, and the absolute certainty that what I encountered wasn't a bear, wasn't a mountain lion, and wasn't human. Some nights I still wake up hearing that scream. I still wonder what would have happened if I'd seen it face to face, or if it had decided to approach my tent instead of circling my camp. What haunts me most is the feeling that it was aware of me in a way that went beyond animal curiosity, that it was assessing me, thinking about me. Whatever is out there in those mountains, it's smarter than we give it credit for, and it knows the wilderness in ways we never will. Story 5. I've been sitting on this for days now, trying to make sense of it. but I can't. I'm typing this at 3 in the morning because sleep isn't happening anymore. Not since last weekend. I figure maybe writing it all down will help, and maybe someone here has seen something similar. Last weekend, on October 4th, my wife Elaine and I were at our cabin in Ponderosa State Park, near McCall, Idaho. We try to get out there every fall when the summer crowds thin out. There's something special about that time of year. The air gets this crisp feel, the leaves start turning, and you can actually enjoy nature without bumping into tourists every 5 minutes. We decided to take our paddleboards to the meanders. It's this winding 3-mile stretch that connects Piat Lake to Upper Piat Lake. If you've never been, it's absolutely gorgeous. The water winds through these marshy areas with tall grass and scattered trees, usually pretty quiet, especially in October. We got on the water around 10 in the morning. Perfect day for it. Cool, but not cold. About 60 degrees with some cloud cover. The water was glass smooth in spots. We spent about 3 hours just cruising, stopping occasionally to eat some trail mix or take pictures. Elaine had packed us some sandwiches in a dry bag, and we found a little sandy area to sit and eat. After lunch, we kept going upriver. I remember checking my watch. It was about 1:30. We hadn't seen another person for at least an hour. I was testing out this new camera I'd bought online. Basically a knockoff GoPro, but it had decent reviews. I'd been playing with it all morning, trying to figure out all the settings. I beached my paddleboard on this small sandbar while Elaine floated about 20 yards upstream. I wanted to get a nice panoramic shot of the whole area. The river was maybe 30 yards wide at that point, with dense forest on both sides. I remember standing up, doing a slow 360 spin to capture everything. That's when I saw them, across the river, maybe 70 yards away, standing among the trees at the edge of the forest. 2 figures just watching us. At first my brain tried to make them into other hikers or maybe hunters, but they were too big, way too big. They were standing side by side, perfectly still. One was slightly shorter than the other, maybe 7 feet tall, while the taller one had to be close to 8 feet. Even from that distance, I could tell they were massive, not just tall, but wide. They had these incredibly thick chests and shoulders that just didn't look human. Their arms hung down almost to their knees. What really got me were their faces. The clouds had parted a bit, and there was enough light that I could make out some details. They weren't exactly human faces, but they weren't like ape faces either. The best way I can describe it is like a cross between an old man and a Neanderthal. Flat, wide faces with deep-set features, rounded heads sitting directly on their shoulders, with barely any visible neck, and fur, lots of it, long and shaggy, covering their bodies. I froze. Completely froze. My heart started hammering in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat. They were just standing there, watching me. I got this overwhelming feeling they were deliberately letting me see them. There was this intelligence in how they stood there. They weren't hiding, but they weren't approaching either, just observing with this cold, disapproving silence. I remember thinking, holy shit, I need to get this on camera. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my stupid knockoff GoPro. I kept hitting the wrong buttons because I wasn't familiar with it yet. By the time I finally got the right setting and looked back up, they were gone, just gone. I couldn't believe it. Something that big shouldn't be able to move so quietly or quickly. Elaine, I called out, my voice cracking. Elaine, you won't believe what I just saw. She paddled over, asking what was wrong. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. When I told her about the 2 creatures, she went pale. She kept looking over at the tree line, saying she could feel them watching her. Before I could stop her, she started paddling downstream, away from where I'd seen them. But I needed another glimpse. I know it sounds crazy, but I paddled toward where they had been. I kept calling out, "Hello, I just want to see you again. I won't hurt you." I felt drawn to them like I needed to make contact. As I got closer to the shore, I thought I saw a face again, partially hidden among branches about 10 feet up in a tree. I grabbed my phone this time and started taking pictures, frantically snapping at where I thought I'd seen movement. That's when everything changed. The air got heavier somehow. The woods went dead silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. A feeling of dread washed over me like ice water. I suddenly felt extremely unwelcome, like I'd crossed some invisible line by pursuing them. The feeling of being watched turned threatening. It was as if they were communicating directly to my brain. Leave now. I stopped calling out. I turned my paddleboard around and started heading back downstream as fast as I could, my arms burning from the effort. The whole time, I could feel eyes on my back. I kept fighting the urge to look behind me, terrified of what I might see if I did. I caught up with Elaine about half a mile downstream. She was panicking, saying she'd heard something large moving through the brush parallel to her as she paddled. We stayed in the middle of the river after that, paddling like our lives depended on it until we reached our starting point. That night at the cabin, we could barely sleep. Every crack or rustle outside sent my heart racing. I kept thinking they might have followed us back somehow. I checked my phone for the pictures I'd taken, but they're frustratingly unclear. Just dark shapes that could be faces in the shadows or nothing at all. I've shown them to a few friends, and they dismiss them as just shadows and my imagination. But I know what I saw. I've spent the last few days researching Bigfoot sightings in Idaho. Turns out the McCall area has had several reports over the years. Some locals avoid certain parts of the forest entirely. An old Forest Service guy I talked to just nodded when I described what I'd seen. He wouldn't confirm anything directly, but said, "The wilderness keeps its secrets for those who respect them." The thing that haunts me most isn't just that they exist. It's that they seem to deliberately show themselves to me, like they wanted me to see them. I keep wondering why. Was it a warning? Were they curious, or something else entirely? I can't stop thinking about their faces. They weren't animals, not completely. There was something ancient and intelligent in those eyes, something that understood exactly what I was and chose to reveal itself to me. Elaine wants to sell the cabin now. She says she'll never feel comfortable there again. I haven't decided yet. Part of me is terrified at the thought of going back, but another part feels strangely drawn to the area, like there's unfinished business. I've told a few people about this, and most think I'm either making it up or that I saw bears standing on their hind legs. But bears don't stand perfectly still side by side, watching you with intelligent eyes. Bears don't have that presence. Last night, I dreamed I was back on that river. In the dream, I heard a voice, not with my ears, but in my head, saying, "You saw us because we allowed it." I woke up in a cold sweat at 4 in the morning. I check my phone every day, zooming in on those photos, trying to find clearer evidence of what I saw. Sometimes I think I can make out a face, that wide, flat face with deep-set eyes, but it's never clear enough to convince anyone else. I don't know what to do with this experience. I can't explain it. I can't forget it. I'm not the same person I was before that day on the water. I find myself staring into the woods near our home, wondering if they're out there too, watching and waiting. Has anyone else had an experience like this, especially around McCall or Piat Lake? I need to know I'm not going crazy. I need to know if anyone else has felt that sensation, that moment when you realize you're being observed by something that shouldn't exist, something ancient that's been there all along, hidden in plain sight. Sometimes I wonder if they're watching me right now, even as I type this, and sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I wonder if I should go back, alone, to see if they'll show themselves again. But then I remember that feeling, that sudden shift from curiosity to danger, and I know deep down that some doors once opened can never be closed again. Some knowledge changes you forever. I haven't told Elaine, but I've already booked another weekend at the cabin for next month. I need to go back. I need to understand. I keep telling myself I'll stay away from the meanders, that I'll just enjoy the cabin and the safe parts of the park. But I know that's a lie. I know exactly where I'll go, because they're waiting for me there. I can feel it. Story 6. I still can't explain what I saw that day, and it's been haunting me for months now. My name is Jack Dover, and I've lived in Humboldt County, California all my life. I'm known as an honest man around these parts. Never been one for tall tales or exaggerations. But what happened last autumn while I was hunting in the Siskiyou wilderness has turned my world upside down. It was early October, 1886. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the mountains with splashes of red and gold. I'd been planning this hunting trip for weeks, eager to bring home some game before the harsh winter set in. I packed light, just my Winchester rifle, a day's worth of provisions, a canteen of water, and my hunting knife. Left my cabin before dawn, while the air still had that bone-chilling bite to it. The morning fog hung heavy between the pines as I made my way deeper into the wilderness. I know these woods like the back of my hand. Been hunting here since I was a boy, but there's something about the Siskiyous that always keeps you on edge. The locals speak of strange things in these mountains. Old miners tell stories over whiskey about eerie screams echoing through the canyons at night. Indigenous folks have their legends too, though they don't share them easily with outsiders like me. By midday, I'd covered several miles, working my way up toward the higher elevations where I'd had luck before. The fog had burned off, leaving behind one of those perfect autumn days. Crisp air, blue skies, sunlight filtering through the canopy. I'd been following fresh deer tracks for about an hour, moving quietly through a dense patch of forest that opened into a small clearing dotted with berry bushes. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a bear standing upright. It was about 150 yards away, partially obscured by foliage, picking berries or shoots from the bushes. But something wasn't right. The way it moved was too deliberate, too human. I slowly raised my field glass to get a better look, and what I saw froze the blood in my veins. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. The creature was enormous, 7 feet tall at least, probably more. It had a massive frame, shoulders broader than any man I've ever seen, covered in long, matted hair that hung from its body like a shaggy coat. The hair was a dark brown, almost black in places, with hints of rusty red where the sunlight hit it. But its head, God help me, its head was what struck me most. It had a face somewhat like a bulldog's, with a pronounced brow and a flattened nose, but undeniably with human qualities too. Short ears poked through the tangled hair on its head. I remember every detail with painful clarity. The way its massive arms reached up to pluck berries, fingers working with surprising dexterity. How its beard, yes, it had an actual beard, moved slightly in the breeze. Parts of its body had less hair, particularly on what would be the face, palms, and chest of a human. These exposed areas showed skin that was weathered and leathery, like tanned hide. I stood frozen, barely breathing, my heart hammering so loud I was certain the creature would hear it. Every instinct told me to run, but I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. I just watched as this thing methodically harvested berries, completely unaware of my presence. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to lower myself into a crouching position behind a fallen log. My hands trembled as I set down my field glass and reached for my rifle. I raised it, finding the creature in my sights. My finger hovered over the trigger. I've killed many animals in my time, never hesitated before. But looking at this creature through my rifle sights, something stopped me. There was something too human about it. Not just its shape, but its movements, its purpose. I couldn't squeeze the trigger. As if sensing my presence, the creature suddenly went still, its head lifted, nose testing the air. Then it turned slowly, deliberately in my direction. Our eyes met. I'll never forget those eyes as long as I live, dark and deep-set under that prominent brow, but unmistakably intelligent, aware. There was something in that gaze, curiosity perhaps, or ancient wisdom, that paralyzed me completely. We stared at each other across the clearing for what seemed like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Neither of us moved. I barely breathed. Then it happened. The creature opened its mouth and made a sound that will haunt my nightmares until the day I die. It wasn't a growl or a roar like you'd expect from a wild animal. It was a voice, high-pitched and shrill, almost soprano, eerily human, like a woman in terrible distress or extreme fear. The sound echoed through the clearing, making the hair on my neck stand on end. It wasn't forming words, at least none that I could understand, but the vocalization had purpose. It was communicating something. The sound stopped as abruptly as it had started. The creature took a step backward, still watching me, then another. I remained frozen in place, rifle half raised, unable to process what I was seeing. Then, with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large, it turned and bolted into the thick forest. The vegetation shook violently as it passed, and I could hear branches snapping under its weight. Despite its size, it moved with the agility of a deer, quickly disappearing from sight. The sound of its retreat faded, and I was left alone in the suddenly silent clearing, my rifle still pointed at nothing. I don't know how long I stayed there, unable to move. My legs felt leaden, my mouth bone dry. When I finally managed to stand, I nearly collapsed as the blood rushed back into my limbs. I shouldered my rifle with shaking hands and began backing away, unwilling to turn my back to the direction the creature had gone. Once I felt I was at a safe distance, I turned and ran like I never had before, heedless of the branches that whipped at my face and the roots that threatened to trip me. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I realized I had no idea where I was. In my panic, I'd lost my bearings. It took me hours to find my way back to familiar territory, jumping at every sound, my rifle clutched so tightly, my knuckles turned white. By the time I reached my cabin, night had fallen, and I was half convinced the creature was right behind me. I barred my door that night and didn't sleep a wink, sitting with my back against the wall, rifle across my lap, staring at the windows until dawn broke. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it had been a bear or some other known animal seen in poor light. But I couldn't lie to myself. What I'd seen was neither man nor any beast known to these mountains. After a week of sleepless nights, I finally worked up the courage to mention it to old Jim Peterson, who's trapped these mountains for 40 years. I expected laughter or concern for my mental state. Instead, his weathered face grew serious, and he nodded slowly. "You've seen the hermit," he said quietly, glancing around though we were alone in his cabin. "The hermit of the Siskious." Jim told me others had seen it too, mostly around Marble Mountain and near Happy Camp. Some described it as taller than I had, others the same, but the descriptions matched. The bulldog face, the long hair, the unsettling human qualities. According to Jim, the indigenous people have known about these creatures for generations. They believe them to be a race of their own, living in the most remote parts of the mountains, making winter quarters in the caves of Marble Mountain. "They're peaceful," Jim said. "Feed mostly on berries, roots, shoots. Never known one to harm anybody, but they don't like being seen." I asked him about the voice, that terrible shrill cry that still echoes in my dreams. "That's their warning," he explained. "They make that sound when they're scared or want to scare you off. Consider yourself lucky. Most who hear that sound never see what made it." I've been back to the woods since then. A man in these parts has to hunt, has to make a living. But I never go alone anymore, and I never venture near that clearing. Sometimes at night, when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear that soprano cry echoing down from the mountains. It makes me wonder what else might be out there, what other secrets these ancient forests keep. I've told few people about what I saw. Most wouldn't believe me anyway. But I know what I saw that day wasn't human. Not entirely. But it wasn't just an animal either. It was something in between. something that shouldn't exist according to everything I've been taught. Yet there it was, as real as the ground beneath my feet. L.W. Music, a local writer, has been collecting accounts like mine for a booklet he's putting together. He believes there's enough evidence to prove these creatures exist. I'm not sure what to believe anymore, except what my own eyes saw. All I know is that I can never unsee that creature, never unhear that voice, and I can never shake the feeling that when our eyes met across that clearing, it wasn't just looking at me. It was recognizing me, evaluating me, understanding me in some fundamental way that I still can't comprehend. And sometimes, on the darkest nights, I wonder if it's still out there, watching, waiting, remembering my face just as clearly as I remember its own. Story 7. I still can't explain what we saw that evening in the Allegheny Desert. It's been 17 years since that day in April of 1906, and the memory remains as vivid as if it happened yesterday. I've spent my academic career studying folklore and ancient cultures, but nothing in my scholarly pursuits prepared me for what we encountered. I was 32 then, an ambitious scholar from St. Petersburg University, traveling with a research caravan through Mongolia. My colleagues had laughed when I proposed the expedition to study the oral traditions of the remote desert communities. "Baradane," they'd said, "you'll find nothing but sand and superstition." Perhaps they were right about the sand. Our party consisted of 8 people, myself, 2 research assistants, our Mongolian translator Batbaya, and 4 local guides, who also served as our guards and camel handlers. We'd been traveling for 11 days, stopping at small settlements to document stories and traditions before continuing deeper into the desert. The journey had been grueling but rewarding. I'd already filled 3 notebooks with transcriptions. That particular day had been exhausting. The April heat was unexpectedly intense, and we'd been traveling since dawn. My skin felt like parchment despite the protective clothing, and my water ration tasted warm and metallic. I remember longing for the cool libraries of the university, questioning my decision to pursue fieldwork in such harsh conditions. By late afternoon, the sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the dunes. The temperature was finally dropping, bringing blessed relief. Our lead guide, Ganbold, an older man with a weathered face and quiet authority, had been pushing us to reach the next water source before nightfall. He'd been growing increasingly anxious as the day progressed, frequently scanning the horizon and exchanging hushed words with the other guides. I was lost in my thoughts, mentally organizing my notes from the previous settlement when the caravan suddenly halted. The abrupt stop nearly caused me to collide with the camel ahead. I looked up, irritated by the interruption, when I noticed the absolute silence that had fallen over our group. Ganbold stood frozen at the front of our line. His arm was extended, pointing toward a large dune about 300 yards ahead of us. His voice cracked as he cried out something in Mongolian that I couldn't understand. The terror in his voice required no translation. I squinted against the setting sun, which had positioned itself directly behind the dune in question. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just the silhouette of the sandhill against the blazing orange sky. Then I noticed it, a figure standing atop the dune. Even now, I struggle to accurately describe what we all clearly saw. It was unmistakably the shape of a man, but not quite a man. It stood upright on 2 legs, massive and broad-shouldered, its entire body covered in what appeared to be thick hair or fur. The backlighting from the sun prevented me from discerning details, but the silhouette was striking, at least 7 feet tall, with disproportionately long arms that hung at its sides. "What is that?" My assistant Edward whispered beside me. "Is it one of the nomads?" Batbaya, our translator, shook his head slowly, his face drained of color. "Not a man," he said in his halting English. "Not a man." The figure remained motionless for perhaps 15 seconds, though it felt like an eternity. It seemed to be observing us as intently as we were observing it. Then, with deliberate slowness, it turned its head, surveying our caravan from one end to the other. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling desert air. Though I couldn't see its eyes, I was certain it was looking directly at each of us in turn. When its gaze reached me, and I say gaze, despite not being able to see its face, I felt a sensation I've never experienced before or since. It was as if something ancient and intelligent was assessing me, cataloguing me. My mouth went dry, and despite the cooling temperature, sweat trickled down my spine. Then, with surprising grace for something so large, it turned and descended the far side of the dune. Within seconds, it had vanished completely. No one spoke. The only sound was the nervous shuffling of the camels and the wind whistling through the dunes. I found myself holding my breath, waiting for the figure to reappear, but it didn't. Finally, Ganbold broke the silence with a stream of urgent Mongolian. Bat Bayar translated for us. He says we must move quickly. We should not be here when darkness comes. What was that thing? I asked, my academic curiosity momentarily overriding my fear. Batbaya consulted with the guides, who spoke rapidly among themselves, occasionally glancing fearfully toward the dune where the figure had stood. They call it many names, Batbaya finally said. The Old One of the Sands, the Desert Watcher. It lives in the deepest desert where no people go. Very bad luck to see one. Edouard, always the skeptic, adjusted his spectacles. Perhaps it was just a nomad, maybe a tall man wearing furs. The guides shook their heads vehemently. One of them, Terbish, spoke up, and Batbayar translated, "No nomad would be alone in this part of the desert. No one comes here except in large groups, and only when necessary, and no man stands that tall." "Are they dangerous?" my other assistant, McCall, asked. I could hear the tremor in his voice. Batbaya hesitated before answering. The old stories say they avoid people, but sometimes, if you disturb their territory... He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air. We quickly fell into debate about our next course of action. I suggested we approach the dune to look for tracks or other evidence, but this proposal was met with horror from our guides. Ganbold threatened to leave us immediately if we attempted any such investigation. Edouard and McCall were divided. Edouard wanted to continue as planned to the next water source, while McCall advocated for changing our route entirely. The guides insisted we should move away from this area as quickly as possible. In the end, we compromised. We would continue to the water source as planned, but we would post extra guards throughout the night and leave at first light. None of us mentioned the obvious fact that if the creature wished us harm, our small group could do little to defend ourselves. As we resumed our journey, the mood had transformed completely. The easy conversation and occasional laughter that had characterized our caravan was replaced by tense silence. Every eye scanned the surrounding dunes, and every unusual shadow caused a collective intake of breath. We reached the water source, a small spring surrounded by scrubby vegetation, just as darkness fell. Setting up camp felt mechanical that night, our movements efficient but joyless. After a sparse meal that none of us had much appetite for, Ganbold established the guard rotation. I volunteered for the first watch along with Terbish. Sitting beside the small fire, my rifle across my knees, I couldn't stop replaying the sighting in my mind. My scientific training urged me to find a rational explanation. A desert mirage, perhaps, or an optical illusion caused by the setting sun. But I knew what I had seen, and so did everyone else. Terbish sat across from me, his eyes constantly moving across the darkness beyond our campfire. Finally, I broke the silence. "Have you ever seen one before?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately, and I thought perhaps he hadn't understood my question. But then he spoke, and Batbayar, who was still awake nearby, translated. "Once, when I was a boy, my father took me hunting in the mountains to the north. We found large footprints in the snow, bigger than any man's. My father made us leave immediately, but I saw it watching us from the trees as we departed." "What are they?" I asked. Turbish shrugged. The old ones say they were here before people. They know the secrets of the desert and the mountains. Some say they are guardians of sacred places. Others say they are demons. My grandmother told me they can speak to each other across great distances without making a sound. I wanted to dismiss these as superstitions, but after what I'd seen, I wasn't so certain anymore. The night crawled by with excruciating slowness. Every sound, the shift of sand in the wind, the snorting of the camels, the crackle of our dying fire, seemed amplified. During my watch, I saw nothing unusual, but when I finally lay down to sleep, rest eluded me. I must have drifted off eventually, because I woke with a start to Edward shaking my shoulder. The camp was in an uproar. In the pale pre-dawn light, Ganbold was gesturing wildly and speaking rapidly to Batbaya. "What's happening?" I asked, fumbling for my glasses. "Tracks," Edward said, his face ashen, "all around the camp, and 2 of the camels are missing." I stumbled to my feet and followed Edward to where the others had gathered. Surrounding our camp, clear in the soft sand, were footprints. They were enormous, at least 16 inches long and 8 inches wide, with 5 distinct toe impressions. They circled our entire encampment, sometimes coming as close as 15 feet to where we had slept. "The guards saw nothing?" I asked incredulously. Mikhail shook his head. "They heard some sounds around midnight, thought it was the wind or the camels shifting. No one saw anything." I crouched to examine the nearest footprint more closely. It was deeply impressed in the sand, suggesting considerable weight. The sand at the edges was still loose, indicating the tracks were fresh. "We followed them," Turbish said through Batbaya. "They go to where the camels were tied. 2 are gone. No blood, no signs of struggle. The tracks lead away into the dunes." "We must go after them," I said. "Those camels carry half our water and supplies." The guides exchanged glances. "No," Ganbold said firmly, not bothering with translation. The meaning was clear enough. "He says we leave now," Batbaya explained unnecessarily. "We travel light, straight to the next settlement. 1 day hard riding if we push the remaining camels." I wanted to argue, to insist we at least attempt to recover our supplies, but the expressions on the guides' faces stopped me. This wasn't negotiable. And looking at those massive footprints surrounding our camp, I couldn't entirely blame them. We packed quickly, abandoning non-essential items to compensate for the lost carrying capacity. As the sun rose fully, we mounted our camels and prepared to depart. I took one last look at the footprints. In the morning light, they seemed almost unreal, like something from a folk tale rather than physical impressions in the sand before me. Just before we left, I noticed something odd. The tracks that led away from our camp headed directly toward the dune where we had first spotted the figure. I pointed this out to Batbaya. "It is watching," he said simply. I followed his gaze and felt my blood freeze. There, atop the distant dune, barely visible in the morning haze, stood the figure again. Even at this distance, I could tell it was the same being, the same imposing silhouette, the same unnatural stillness. It raised one massive arm, not in threat, but almost in acknowledgement. Then, just as it had done the previous evening, it turned and disappeared over the dune. We rode hard that day, pushing the camels to their limits. No one spoke much. We were all lost in our thoughts, constantly scanning the horizon. But we saw nothing more of the creature. We reached the settlement by nightfall, exhausted and shaken. The local people noted our missing camels and reduced supplies, but asked few questions when Ganbold spoke quietly to their headman. That night, as we recovered in the safety of the settlement, I asked Batbaya why the creature had taken our camels, but left us unharmed. "Perhaps it was curious," he said. "Perhaps it was a warning. The desert has its own rules, Professor Baradane. We were visitors who saw something we were not meant to see." I've continued my academic career since then, publishing papers on Mongolian folklore and nomadic traditions. I've never included this encounter in my official work. How could I? It would destroy my credibility. But I know what we saw. I know what circled our camp as we slept. Sometimes when I'm working late in my university office, I glance up at the window, half expecting to see that silhouette watching me from outside. And sometimes, in my dreams, I'm back in that desert, following those massive footprints over the dunes, desperately trying to discover what lies on the other side. Yamo. Story 8. I never believed in this kind of stuff before. I'm not the type to buy into conspiracy theories or ghost stories. I'm a retired accountant, for crying out loud. My wife Linda and I have always been practical people. We saved our money, planned carefully for retirement, and finally bought that little cabin we'd always dreamed about. 20 acres of beautiful forest land near Viola, California, about 9 miles from Lassen Volcanic National Park. This happened back in August of 2001, August 9th to be exact. It's been over 20 years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Some things just stick with you, you know? Our cabin isn't anything fancy, just a simple 2-bedroom place with a nice deck that overlooks the property. We've got this little creek that runs along the eastern edge. It's peaceful there. That's why we bought it, to get away from the noise and stress of the city. We'd been going up there most weekends that summer, enjoying the quiet and the fresh air. Linda would read her mystery novels while I'd fish or work on small projects around the property. That particular night started like any other. We had a simple dinner, played a couple games of cards, and turned in around 10:30. I remember being exhausted because I'd spent the day clearing some brush away from the cabin. Fire safety and all that. I fell asleep almost instantly. I don't know exactly what time it was when Linda shook me awake. Had to be somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning. It was pitch black outside. "Robert," she whispered, her hand gripping my shoulder tightly. "Robert, wake up. Do you hear that?" I was groggy, annoyed at being woken up. "Hear what?" I mumbled, trying to roll back over. "Listen," she insisted, and there was something in her voice that made me pay attention. I sat up and held my breath. At first, I didn't hear anything except the usual night sounds. The soft gurgle of the creek, the occasional rustle of wind through the pines. But then, it's really hard to describe what we heard. It wasn't a scream exactly, though that's the closest word I can think of. It started low, almost like a moan, then rose in pitch until it became this high, wavering sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Then it dropped back down again. The whole thing lasted maybe 5 or 6 seconds. Then silence for a few moments, and then it happened again. Same pattern, same bizarre, unnatural sound. "What the hell is that?" Linda whispered. She was clutching my arm so tightly it almost hurt. "I don't know," I said, and I honestly didn't. In all my 63 years, I'd never heard anything like it. I got out of bed and went to the window. Our cabin has these big windows that look out into the forest. There was a quarter moon that night, so I could just make out the silhouettes of the trees against the sky. The sound came again, and I tried to pinpoint where it was coming from. It wasn't close. Maybe half a mile away, past our property line, beyond the creek where the land slopes down into thicker forest, but despite the distance, it was loud enough to carry clearly through the trees. That's what bothered me. Whatever was making that sound had some serious lung capacity. "Is it a mountain lion?" Linda asked. She'd come to stand beside me at the window. "No," I said immediately. "We've heard mountain lions before. They make this horrible screaming sound, but it's different. This was, I don't know, more controlled. It had a pattern to it, almost like speech, but not quite. Could it be someone playing a prank?" she suggested. But we both knew that was unlikely. Our nearest neighbor is over a mile away, and who would trek through dense forest in the middle of the night just to make weird noises? The vocalization continued for maybe 30 seconds in total, that rising and falling pattern repeated about 5 or 6 times. And then it stopped. What happened next was even stranger than the sound itself. The forest went completely silent. I mean, dead silent. The creek, which is always audible from our bedroom window, seemed to disappear. No wind in the trees. No insects chirping, no owls hooting. Nothing. It was like someone had pressed a mute button on the entire forest. "Do you hear that?" I whispered to Linda. "I don't hear anything," she said. "Exactly." We stood there at the window for what felt like forever, just listening to the silence. It was oppressive, almost physical, like the air had gotten heavier. I remember feeling a crawling sensation up my spine, a primal kind of fear that I couldn't rationalize away. After maybe 5 minutes of this unnatural quiet, the normal sounds of the forest gradually returned. First, the soft babble of the creek, then the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was like whatever had silenced the woods had moved on. We eventually went back to bed, but I don't think either of us slept much after that. Linda kept asking what I thought it could have been, and I kept saying I didn't know, because I honestly didn't. I've spent my whole life outdoors, hunting, hiking. I know what bears sound like. I know what elk sound like. I know what every native animal to Northern California sounds like. This wasn't any of them. The next morning, we didn't talk about it much. It's funny how the human mind works. In the daylight, with the sun shining and birds singing, it was easier to dismiss what we'd heard. Maybe it was just some animal we weren't familiar with. Maybe the silence afterward was just our imagination. We went about our day as usual. I fixed a leaky faucet in the bathroom. Linda weeded her little herb garden. We had lunch on the deck. Normal stuff. But I kept finding myself looking toward that area beyond the creek, wondering. After lunch, I decided to go check it out. I told Linda I was going to do a perimeter walk of the property, something I do regularly to check for fallen trees or other issues. She gave me a look. She knew exactly what I was doing, but she didn't try to stop me. I took my walking stick and my old .38 revolver, not because I expected trouble, but because I've always believed in being prepared when walking in the wilderness. There are mountain lions out there after all. It took me about 20 minutes to reach the creek. I crossed at a shallow point and continued into the woods beyond our property line. The land drops pretty steeply here, and the forest gets denser. Pine and fir trees grow close together, and there's a lot of underbrush. It's slow going. I wasn't exactly sure where the sound had come from, but I had a general idea of the direction. I walked for maybe another half hour, keeping my eyes open for anything unusual, broken branches, disturbed ground, tracks. But I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. What I did notice, though, was the silence. It wasn't as complete as it had been the night before, but it was still quieter than it should have been. Fewer birds calling, less rustling in the underbrush from small animals. It felt watched. That's the only way I can describe it. Like every tree had eyes. I'm not a superstitious man, but standing there in those silent woods, I felt a deep unease that I couldn't shake. I decided I'd gone far enough and turned back toward the cabin. That evening, Linda and I sat on the deck watching the sunset. We'd opened a bottle of wine, and maybe it was the alcohol that loosened my tongue, but I finally brought up what had happened. "That sound last night," I said. "It really bothered me." Linda nodded. "Me too. I've been thinking about it all day." "I've been camping and hunting my whole life," I told her. "I've never heard anything like that." We talked about it for a while, going through all the possible explanations again. Some animal we weren't familiar with, a person playing a prank, the wind creating a strange acoustic effect through the trees. None of them felt right. We went to bed early that night. I won't lie, I was hoping to hear it again, to prove to myself that it was something ordinary, something explainable. But the night passed quietly. We went back to the city the following day. As planned, life went on. I didn't think about the incident much over the next week, busy with errands and catching up with friends. About 10 days after our experience, I was having coffee with my buddy Mike. He's been hunting and fishing in Northern California his whole life, knows the outdoors better than anyone I know. I casually mentioned what we'd heard at the cabin. Strangest damn thing, I told him. This weird screaming sound, but not quite a scream. Hard to describe. Mike got this funny look on his face. "Where exactly is your cabin again?" he asked. I told him, and his expression turned even more serious. "You ever hear of Bigfoot?" he asked. I laughed. I actually laughed in his face. "Come on, Mike, I'm being serious here." "So am I," he said, not cracking a smile. "There have been reports in that area. Strange sounds, exactly like what you're describing. I thought he was pulling my leg, but he insisted I look it up when I got home. Check out some of the recordings online," he said. "See if they match what you heard." I didn't give it much thought at the time. Mike's always been interested in that kind of stuff. Bigfoot, UFOs, the Loch Ness Monster. I figured it was just his imagination running wild. But that night, sitting at my computer, I found myself typing Bigfoot vocalizations into the search bar. Just out of curiosity, you understand, I found a website with audio recordings from various locations. Willow Creek, parts of Oregon, Washington State. I clicked on one from Willow Creek, not expecting much. The hair on my arm stood up as soon as it started playing. That same moaning sound that rose into a high-pitched wail before dropping back down. The same pattern. The same unsettling quality that wasn't quite animal, wasn't quite human. It was exactly, and I mean exactly, what Linda and I had heard that night. I called her over to listen, and the color drained from her face. "That's it," she whispered. "That's exactly what we heard. I've played that recording for other people since then. Most of them just shrug and say it could be anything, a known animal distorted by the recording equipment, or even a hoax. But they weren't there that night. They didn't feel the way the forest went silent afterward, like every living thing was holding its breath." Linda and I still go to our cabin regularly. We love it there, but I won't lie. We listen more carefully when darkness falls. Sometimes, when I'm alone on the deck at night, I find myself staring out toward that area beyond the creek, wondering if whatever made those sounds is still out there, moving silently through the trees, watching. I don't know what it was. I really don't. But I know what I heard, and I know it wasn't anything I can explain, and sometimes that's the scariest thing of all, knowing there are things out there in the darkness that defy explanation, things that can make an entire forest go silent with their presence. Story 9. I've been sitting on this experience for almost 20 years now, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I've only told a few people, and most think I'm either crazy or making it up for attention. But I know what I saw that week in April 2005, and it changed me forever. I was living in a small house near Pelican Bay with my roommate Karen at the time. We'd moved there about 6 months earlier, looking for a quieter life away from Toronto. The house wasn't much, just a 2-bedroom place on a back road leading toward Lake Rosso, but the rent was cheap and the surroundings were beautiful. We both worked from home most days, so the isolation didn't bother us. That Tuesday, April 12th, started like any other. I remember it was unseasonably cold for April. There was still ice on Lake Rosso, which was unusual that late in spring. I spent most of the day at my desk by the window, working on some freelance graphic design projects. Karen was in the kitchen baking something, banana bread, I think. The smell was filling the house. It was around 5:30 in the evening, and the light was starting to fade, that weird twilight time where everything looks a bit fuzzy and blue. I was staring at my computer screen, trying to finish up so I could eat dinner, when something caught my eye outside the window. At first, I thought it was just a neighbor walking past. Our property backed onto woods, but people sometimes cut through to get to the lake. But something about the movement seemed off. It was too fluid, too powerful. I looked up properly and felt my entire body go cold. About 30 yards from our window was what looked like a person, but not a person. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, maybe taller. It was covered in dark, matted hair or fur that hung in patches over its body. The hair was a deep brown, almost black in the fading light, and it was walking upright, striding with purpose toward Lake Rosso. I couldn't move. My fingers hovered over my keyboard as I watched this thing walk past. It had broad shoulders, long arms that hung lower than a human's should, and a slightly hunched posture. But it wasn't stumbling or awkward. It moved like it owned the place, powerful and deliberate. "Karen," I managed to whisper, my voice barely working. "Karen, come here right now." Karen must have heard the fear in my voice because she came running. By the time she reached the window, the creature had made it about 20 yards further along. "What the hell is that?" she hissed, pressing her face against the glass. We stood there watching as this thing, this creature, walked all the way to the edge of Lake Rosso, which was about 100 yards from our house. Then without hesitation, it just walked onto the ice. The frozen surface was starting to thaw at the edges, but the center was still solid enough to hold whatever this was. It crossed the lake in long, confident strides, heading toward the dense forest on the other side. We watched until it disappeared into the tree line on the far shore, neither of us speaking. When it was finally gone, Karen turned to me, her face pale. "That wasn't a person in a costume," she said quietly. "Did you see how it moved?" I nodded, my mouth dry. Its arms were too long, and no one would be stupid enough to cross the lake right now. The ice is melting. We spent that evening on the internet, searching for answers. We found stories about Bigfoot and Sasquatch sightings, but we were both skeptical people before this. I'd always laughed at those shows on TV about cryptids and monsters. But what else could explain what we'd seen? We debated calling the police, but decided against it. What would we say? "Hello? We just saw Bigfoot walk across a frozen lake." They'd think we were pranking them, or high on something. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind through the trees outside had me sitting bolt upright, heart pounding. I kept thinking about that creature and wondering if it would come back. The next morning, I felt exhausted and on edge. Karen and I kept giving each other these looks, like we were both waiting for the other to admit it had been a shared hallucination, but neither of us did, because we both knew what we'd seen. I was in town later that day, picking up groceries, when I overheard two guys talking about something they'd seen on Highway 520 the night before. I pretended to be interested in the cereal selection while listening to their conversation. "I'm telling you, man, it was at least 7 feet tall, standing right in the middle of the road like it owned the place," one of them was saying. He looked about 50, with a weathered face and flannel shirt. "And when the headlights hit it, it just turned and looked at us. Those eyes, man, they reflected the light like a deer's, but they were too high up to be any animal I know," he continued. His friend nodded seriously. "You going back out there today?" "Yeah, taking my nephew and his buddies, gonna see if we can find any tracks." I abandoned my shopping cart and practically ran to my car. I needed to tell Karen what I'd heard. When I got home, she was sitting at the window, staring out toward Lake Rosso with a pair of binoculars. "I heard something in town," I blurted out as soon as I got inside. "Two guys talking about seeing something on Highway 520 last night. Tall, standing in the road. It has to be the same thing we saw." Karen lowered the binoculars slowly. "I've been watching the lake all day," she said. "Nothing's crossed back over, but I keep feeling like something's watching the house." That night was worse than the first. Every shadow seemed threatening, every sound amplified. We ended up pushing Karen's dresser in front of the front door, which seems ridiculous now, but at the time it felt necessary. What good would a dresser do against something that size? I don't know, but it made us feel marginally safer. The next day, Thursday the 14th, I drove out to Highway 520 following a hunch. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. A cluster of vehicles parked on the shoulder about 10 miles from our place. 4 or 5 men were walking in the woods just off the road, looking down at the ground. I parked behind them and got out, trying to appear casual. The older man I'd seen in the grocery store was there, pointing at something on the ground, while the others gathered around. "Excuse me," I called out, walking toward them. "I couldn't help noticing you all out here. Find anything interesting?" They looked up, suspicious at first, but the older man seemed eager to share. "Take a look for yourself," he said, gesturing to the ground. What I saw made my stomach drop. There, pressed clearly into the soft earth, was a footprint, but not any footprint I'd ever seen. It was enormous, easily 15 inches long, maybe more. It was deeply impressed into the mud, with clear toe marks at the front and a curved arch. It looked human-like, but impossibly large and with proportions that weren't quite right. "There's a whole trail of them," said a younger guy, probably the nephew. "They go for about 200 yards that way." He pointed deeper into the forest, spaced way far apart too, like whatever made them was taking huge strides. I followed them as they traced the path of footprints. Each one was identical, massive, clearly defined, spaced about 4 to 5 feet apart. No human could make strides that long. Whatever had made these prints was enormous and powerful. "You see something too?" the older man asked me suddenly, studying my face. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yesterday evening near Pelican Bay, walking across Lake Rosso on the ice." Instead of laughing or dismissing me, he nodded seriously. "Heard the Simpson kids saw something Sunday by the trailer park. Their mom too. And then me and Jim here on the highway last night. It's moving around the whole area." "What do you think it is?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged, but his eyes were intense. "Only one thing it could be. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it." I spent about an hour with them, following the tracks until they disappeared into rockier terrain. Before I left, the older man, Bob was his name, told me wildlife officials were coming the next day to document the prints. "Probably won't believe us," he said, "but at least we'll have tried." When I got home, Karen was packing a bag. "What are you doing?" I asked. "I'm going to stay with my sister for a few days," she said, not meeting my eyes. "This is too much. I can't sleep. I keep thinking it's going to come back." I couldn't blame her. Part of me wanted to leave too, but something kept me there. Curiosity, maybe, or just stubborn disbelief that this could actually be happening. Karen left that afternoon. I spent the evening alone in the house, jumping at every sound. I kept the blinds closed and all the lights on, watching mindless TV to distract myself. Around midnight, I finally fell into an uneasy sleep on the couch. A cracking sound woke me. It was still dark, probably around 3 in the morning. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, or maybe a branch breaking outside in the wind, but then I heard it again. A deliberate snap, like something heavy stepping on a fallen branch. It was coming from the direction of the lake. My entire body went rigid with fear. I wanted to get up and check the window, but I was terrified of what I might see. So I just lay there, barely breathing, listening. Another crack, closer this time. Then a strange smell began to seep into the house, musky, wild, like wet dog, but stronger and more pungent. Then came the worst sound of all, a low, rumbling breath right outside my living room window. Deep, rhythmic breathing that no human could produce. It sounded like it was sniffing, testing the air. I've never been so terrified in my life. I lay perfectly still, eyes wide open in the dark, listening to this thing breathe just feet away from me, separated only by a wall and window. It stayed there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, I heard heavy footsteps moving away from the house, back toward the lake. When dawn finally broke, I was still on the couch, too scared to move. As soon as it was light enough, I packed a bag and drove straight to my parents' house 2 hours away. I called in sick to work for a week. I couldn't bring myself to go back to that house. I later heard from a neighbor that wildlife officials had come on Friday to look at the footprints, but rising temperatures had started to wash them away. They took some casts and photos, but officially dismissed it as a hoax or misidentified animal tracks. The most disturbing part came a week later. Bob, the older man who'd shown me the footprints, suffered a sudden brain aneurysm and died. People in town started whispering that it was connected to the sighting, that seeing the creature had somehow caused his death. I don't know if I believe that. But I do know what I saw that week in April. I know what stood outside my window that night, breathing and smelling the air. Karen and I both moved out of that house by the end of the month. Neither of us has been back to Port Seven since. Whatever was in those woods that week, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, or something else entirely, it was real. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind rustles through the trees outside my new home in the city, I still think I can hear that deep, rumbling breath. Story 10. I've never been much of a storyteller, but I need to get this off my chest. I've encountered Bigfoot twice in my life, and despite what skeptics might say, I know what I saw. These experiences happened decades apart, but they're burned into my memory like they happened yesterday. The first time was back in the summer of '79. I was 32 then, full of energy and loved the outdoors. My buddy Rick and I decided to go camping in Tahoe National Forest for a long weekend. We weren't hardcore backpackers or anything, just regular guys who enjoyed getting away from the city noise once in a while. We packed up my old Chevy station wagon with a couple of sleeping bags, a cooler full of beer and sandwich stuff, and Rick's little hibachi grill. We found this perfect spot where we could drive the station wagon right in. It was this interesting area where some newly planted pine seedlings met the old-growth forest. The Forest Service had been replanting after some logging, so there was this clear distinction between the baby trees and these massive old pines. We set up our little camp. Nothing fancy, just the wagon, a couple of fold-out chairs, and a small fire pit we made with rocks. It was getting on toward evening, maybe around 7 o'clock, and Rick was cooking some hot dogs on the hibachi. I remember the smell of them cooking mixed with the pine scent in the air. I was sipping a beer, just kind of staring off into the woods where the big trees started. The sun was getting lower, casting these long shadows through the trees. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought maybe it was a bear standing upright, but something wasn't right about the shape. It was standing at the edge of the mature forest, partially hidden behind a massive pine trunk, watching us. It wasn't as tall as you'd expect from the stories, maybe 5 feet or so, but it was definitely not human. The entire body was covered in hair, a dark brownish-black color that blended with the shadows. But what struck me most were its eyes. They were unusually large, almost like they were designed for seeing in the dark. They had this amber glow from the setting sun hitting them. I froze with my beer halfway to my mouth. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Rick," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Don't make any sudden movements, but look over there by that big pine at the forest edge." Rick turned his head slowly, squinting in the direction I was looking. The moment Rick moved, the creature immediately retreated. It didn't run exactly. It was more like it simply melted back into the forest. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. The movement was so fluid and silent, it was unnerving. "What the hell was that?" Rick asked, standing up now, hot dog tongs still in hand. I think we just saw a Bigfoot," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Rick laughed nervously. "Come on, Harold. Probably just a bear or something. The light's playing tricks." But I knew what I'd seen. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't have those eyes, and they don't move like that. So silently, so purposefully. We tried to laugh it off as the night went on. We finished our beers, ate our hot dogs, told some stupid jokes around the fire, but there was this tension in the air. Every snapping twig in the forest made us both jump. Eventually, we decided to turn in, both of us sleeping in the back of the station wagon with the seats folded down. I remember having trouble falling asleep, staring at the roof of the car, replaying what I'd seen in my mind. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I remember was being jolted awake. It was around 2 in the morning, according to my watch, when I felt it. The entire station wagon suddenly rocked violently from side to side. Something had hit the car with incredible force. "What the fuck?" Rick shouted, also awakened by the movement. The car rocked again, even harder this time. Whatever was outside was strong enough to make a fully loaded station wagon move like it was nothing. We could hear heavy breathing outside, and what sounded like low grunting. The night was pitch black, no moon, just the distant pinpricks of stars through the trees. We couldn't see anything through the windows except darkness. Rick fumbled for the flashlight, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I whispered. "Just don't." My instinct was telling me that drawing attention to ourselves would make things worse. We sat there in terrified silence as whatever was outside circled the car. We could hear heavy footsteps in the dirt and pine needles. Then came the smell, this musky, wild animal odor that somehow seeped into the car. The car rocked one more time, not as violently, almost like a final warning. Then the footsteps retreated, getting fainter until we couldn't hear them anymore. Neither of us slept another wink that night. As soon as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, we packed up our stuff in record time and got the hell out of there. We didn't even make coffee or breakfast, just threw everything in the back and took off. On the drive home, Rick tried to rationalize what happened. "Probably just a bear looking for food," he kept saying, but I knew better. Bears don't stalk you like that. They don't wait until the middle of the night to rock your car in what felt like a deliberate attempt to scare you. I didn't go camping again for almost 2 years after that. For a long time, I didn't tell many people about what happened. The few I did tell just laughed or looked at me with that "poor Harold's losing it" expression. So I kept it to myself, filed it away as one of those unexplainable life experiences. Then, nearly 20 years later, it happened again. It was the late 90s, 97 or 98, I think. I'd gotten more into fishing as I got older. Something peaceful about being on the water, you know. I was at Lake Shasta with my dog Rusty, a golden retriever mix who loved boat rides more than anything. It was a clear day in early October, not too hot. Perfect fishing weather. We'd been out on the lake since early morning in my small aluminum fishing boat. Nothing fancy, just a 14-footer with an outboard motor. It was around midday, and I'd moved the boat closer to the shore, to this little cove that usually had good bass fishing. Rusty was lounging in the front of the boat, occasionally lifting his head when a bird flew by. I was focused on rebaiting my hook when I noticed Rusty's behavior change. His ears perked up, and he was staring intently at the shoreline. I followed his gaze, expecting to see a deer or maybe some hikers. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. Walking along the shoreline toward the water was the largest bipedal creature I've ever seen. This wasn't the smaller figure from my first encounter. This thing was massive, at least 8 feet tall. It had long, shaggy, dark brown hair covering its entire body. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, tapering down to a narrower waist, giving it this inverted triangle shape that no bear or known animal has. It moved with purpose, taking these long, smooth strides. There was nothing awkward about its movement. It was confident, natural. I remember thinking how graceful it seemed for something so large. The creature approached the water's edge and then did something that struck me as oddly deliberate. It dipped its left arm down into the water, almost like it was checking something, like it was checking a fish trap or feeling for fish. This wasn't random animal behavior. This was purposeful, intelligent action. After a few moments, it straightened up and turned slightly, giving me a partial view of its profile. The face was mostly obscured by hair, but I could make out a pronounced brow ridge and what looked like a flattened nose. Then, without any warning or apparent effort, the Bigfoot turned and started climbing up the hillside behind the shore. This wasn't a gentle slope. It was a steep, almost cliff-like incline that would have required technical climbing gear for a human, but this creature scaled it like it was nothing, using its long arms to grab onto trees and rocks, pulling itself up with incredible strength. The whole time this was happening, Rusty was going absolutely crazy. He was running circles around the small boat, yelping and howling in a way I'd never heard before. He wasn't just barking at a squirrel or another dog. This was pure animal fear and recognition that something unnatural was happening. I sat there, frozen, watching until the creature disappeared over the ridge of the hill. The whole encounter probably lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like time had stopped. When I finally came to my senses, I started the boat motor with shaking hands and got us out of there as fast as the little outboard would take us. Rusty wouldn't settle down for hours afterward, even when we were back at the cabin. Again, I was reluctant to share what I'd seen. My ex-husband had always rolled his eyes at my first Bigfoot story, calling it my campfire tale. But something interesting happened about 2 weeks after my Lake Shasta sighting. My cousin Terry went fishing with my husband in roughly the same area. When they came back, Terry was unusually quiet. Later, when my husband was out of earshot, Terry pulled me aside. "Harold," he said, looking uncomfortable, "I saw something weird out there today. I didn't say anything to Mark because, well, you know how he is. But there was this figure on the hillside, really big. It climbed straight up this steep section without any gear or effort. I've never seen anything move like that." I felt a chill run down my spine as Terry described exactly what I had witnessed. Without prompting, without knowing about my own recent experience, he'd seen the same thing. "Did Mark see it?" I asked. Terry shook his head. He was focused on untangling his line. By the time I thought to point it out, it was gone. That confirmation from Terry is what makes me absolutely certain about what I saw. 2 separate witnesses seeing the same impossible thing in the same location. I've spent years since then researching Bigfoot sightings, trying to make sense of my experiences. I've learned that many indigenous cultures have stories of wild, hairy people living in the forests. I've read accounts from loggers, hunters, and hikers that mirror my own experiences. Some researchers believe they're an undiscovered primate species. Others think they might be some kind of interdimensional beings. I don't know what to believe, honestly. All I know is what I saw twice in my life. I saw creatures that shouldn't exist according to conventional science, yet they were as real as the trees and the water. The memory of those encounters, especially those intelligent eyes from the first sighting and the casual display of impossible strength in the second, still gives me chills. I don't expect everyone to believe me. Hell, I probably wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't experienced it firsthand. But I know what I saw, and sometimes late at night when I hear unexplained noises outside my rural home, I wonder if they remember me too. Story 11. We live on about 20 acres outside of Henderson in East Texas. It's nothing fancy, just a single-story ranch house with a big yard that gives way to some pasture land and then woods at the back of our property. We've been here almost 7 years now, and I've always loved how peaceful it is compared to living in the city. The first weird thing happened last January. Jack and I were sitting on our back porch having coffee on a Saturday morning. It was chilly but sunny, one of those perfect winter days where you can actually enjoy being outside. Out of nowhere, we heard this sound from the tree line about 200 yards away. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before, not quite a howl, not quite a scream. It started low and then went higher, lasting maybe 5 or 6 seconds. Jack and I both froze and looked at each other. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. Jack just shook his head. "I don't know." We sat there for maybe 10 minutes waiting to hear it again, but there was nothing. Jack wanted to walk out toward the trees to investigate, but something about that sound made me grab his arm and ask him not to. I can't explain why, but every instinct I had was screaming that whatever made that noise wasn't something we wanted to meet. A couple weeks later, I was over at my dad's place about 5 miles down the road, helping him with some yard work. Dad lives alone since Mom passed 3 years ago, so I try to check on him regularly. I was raking leaves near his shed when I heard that same exact sound coming from the woods behind his property. My blood went cold. I dropped the rake and ran inside, telling Dad I'd heard something strange. He just shrugged and said it was probably a bobcat or maybe coyotes, but I knew it wasn't either of those things. I've lived in rural Texas my whole life. I know what wildlife sounds like. The first time I actually saw something was in February. It was around 9 at night, and I was in the kitchen washing dishes. Our kitchen window looks out over the backyard toward the pasture. The security light was on, casting this weird bluish glow maybe 50 yards out. As I was drying a plate, something caught my eye. Movement at the edge of the light. What I saw still doesn't make sense to me. It was a large, dark figure moving quickly across the edge of our pasture. Not on all fours like a bear, which we don't even have around here anyway, but upright like a person, but wrong, too big, too fluid in its movements. It crossed from one side of the pasture to the other in seconds, way faster than a person could run. I called for Jack, but by the time he got to the window, whatever it was had disappeared into the tree line. When I described what I'd seen, he got this look on his face that was half excitement, half concern. He wanted to grab his rifle and go look, but it was pitch black beyond our yard light. And again, something inside me just knew that was a terrible idea. For the next few weeks, I started noticing little things. The horses in our neighbor's field refusing to go to the back of their pasture near the woods. Our dog Rusty barking at nothing in the middle of the night, his hackles raised as he stared out the windows. We'd find weird broken branches around the property, snapped in ways that didn't make sense. Jack started setting up trail cameras, but they never caught anything except deer and raccoons. Then came March 4th, 2022. I'll never forget that date as long as I live. It was a Friday, and Jack had gone into Longview to pick up some supplies for a fence project. I'd stayed home and spent the afternoon deep cleaning the house. By early evening, I was sweaty and gross, so I decided to take a bath before Jack got home. Our bathroom is at the back of the house, with a small window that faces the woods. The window's about 7 feet up the wall, right above the tub. It's frosted glass for privacy, but we have a potted fern on the windowsill that blocks most of it anyway. I filled the tub, added some bubble bath, and got in. I was just lying there with my eyes closed, enjoying the hot water, when this feeling washed over me. It's hard to describe, but if you've ever felt someone staring at you so intensely that you can physically feel it, that's what it was like. Every hair on my body stood up despite the hot water. My eyes snapped open, and I turned toward the window. Through a gap in the fern leaves, I could see 2 eyes staring down at me. Red eyes. Not just red like when a camera flash hits someone's eyes in a dark room. These were glowing like 2 small red flashlights about 6 inches apart. I froze, completely froze. I couldn't even scream. Those eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, watching. They weren't animal eyes. There was an intelligence behind them that made my stomach turn. I've never felt so exposed, so vulnerable in my entire life. After what felt like forever but was probably only a few seconds, I managed to look away and grabbed for my towel on the rack next to the tub. In that split second, the motion-activated light outside the bathroom window flicked on. When I looked back, the eyes were gone. I jumped out of the tub, wrapped the towel around me, and ran dripping wet through the house, frantically calling Jack on my cell phone. He was only about 10 minutes away and told me to grab his shotgun from the closet and lock myself in our bedroom until he got there. I did exactly that, sitting on the bed with the gun across my lap, shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. Those few minutes until I heard Jack's truck in the driveway were the longest of my life. When Jack got home, I was still in the bedroom, still in just a towel, still trembling. I told him what happened, and he immediately went to check the bathroom window. The way our house is built, that window is a good 8 feet off the ground outside. Jack is 6'2", and he had to stand on his tiptoes to see through it. "Lisa," he called to me, his voice tight, "come look at this." I didn't want to go back in that bathroom, but I made myself do it. Jack pointed at the fern on the windowsill. There was a very specific gap in the leaves, like something had carefully moved them aside to create a peephole, not knocked them over or damaged them, deliberately arranged them to see through. "Whatever was looking at you," Jack said quietly, "had to be at least 6 feet 8 or 7 feet tall to see through this window at this angle." He went outside with his flashlight and gun to look around. The ground was hard and dry. We hadn't had rain in weeks, so there were no footprints. Nothing seemed disturbed. The motion light was still on, illuminating the empty yard. Whatever had been there had vanished without a trace. We didn't sleep that night. Jack sat up with his rifle, and I kept having flashes of those red eyes watching me. The absolute worst part was knowing that it had been so deliberate. This wasn't some random animal wandering by. Something had specifically come to our house, stood at that specific window, and arranged the plant leaves to watch me in the bathtub. The next morning, Jack found something that still gives me nightmares. About 20 yards from the bathroom window, partially hidden under some leaf litter, was a clump of dark hair caught on a bramble. Not like human hair, and not like any animal fur I've ever seen. It was coarse and thick, about 5 or 6 inches long. Jack put it in a plastic bag, and later that day we drove into town and bought security cameras for every corner of our property. For weeks afterward, I refused to be alone in the house. I couldn't use that bathroom without someone else being home. And even then, I kept the blinds drawn tight and pushed a chair against the door. Jack reached out to some local hunter friends who came out and did a thorough search of our property and the surrounding woods. They found nothing except for some weird broken branches about 8 feet up on some trees, and what one guy said might be a footprint in a muddy spot near the creek that runs along the back of our land. It was huge, easily 17 or 18 inches long. The security cameras have caught some strange things since then. Twice, the ones facing the woods have gone offline for exactly 37 minutes before coming back on. Once the camera on the back porch caught what looks like a massive shadow moving across our yard at 3 in the morning, but it's so dark and blurry that it's impossible to tell what it is. The last incident was about 2 weeks after the bathroom window thing. I was in the kitchen making dinner when all the security lights around our property suddenly came on at once. Our dog Rusty started going absolutely berserk, barking and growling at the back door like I've never heard him do before. I called Jack, who was in the garage, and he came running in with his gun. We stood there in the kitchen, looking out at the yard lit up by the security lights. And that's when we heard it again. That same howl scream sound we'd heard months before, but this time it was much closer. It was followed by a second call that seemed to answer from further away, toward the back of our property. There were 2 of them. Since that night, things have been quieter. We still hear strange noises sometimes, and I still get that feeling of being watched when I'm outside, especially at dusk. Jack has become obsessed with researching Bigfoot sightings in East Texas and has connected with other people in the area who've had similar experiences. He's convinced that's what we're dealing with. I don't know what to believe anymore. I used to be so certain about what was real and what wasn't. Now, I jump at shadows. I don't go outside after dark. Every unexplained sound makes my heart race. Those red eyes haunt my dreams. I've lived in these woods my whole life and never felt afraid until now. Whatever's out there, it's watching us, studying us, and the most terrifying part is that it's smart enough to stay just out of sight, just beyond what we can prove. All I know for sure is that something was looking at me through that window, something tall, something intelligent, something that shouldn't exist, and I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, waiting. Story 12. I still don't sleep with the curtains open, not even a crack. It's been 8 months since February, but I can't shake the feeling of being watched. My therapist says writing this down might help, so here goes. Back in February of this year, I was just living my normal life in my small house at the edge of town. It's nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom place I bought after my divorce 3 years ago. The property backs up to a stretch of woods that extends for about a mile before hitting farmland. I always liked the privacy and the sound of the forest at night. That changed on February 12th. I remember the date because it was 2 days before Valentine's Day, and I had just gotten off the phone with my sister, who was trying to set me up with her co-worker. I was exhausted after a long day at work and just wanted to crash. My bedroom is on the first floor, facing the backyard and those woods I mentioned. I've always kept the yard light on. It's one of those motion sensor lights, but I'd rigged it to stay on through the night because I don't like total darkness. I was settling into bed around 11:30 that night. I just turned off the TV and was about to close my eyes when something caught my attention. The curtains in my bedroom don't completely close. There's this small gap, maybe half an inch, right in the middle. Usually, I don't notice it, but that night, something made me look toward that sliver of outside world. What I saw made my blood freeze. There was a silhouette outside my window. Not just any silhouette, a massive head was leaning down, peering through my window. The yard light illuminated just enough of its features that I could make out what I was seeing, and I wished to God I couldn't. Its face was black and leathery looking, with coarse, dark hair framing it. But the eyes, Jesus, the eyes. They were deep set in that face, and they were staring directly at me, not just in my direction, at me, making contact, aware. I couldn't move. I literally could not make my body respond. The creature, I don't know what else to call it, turned its head slightly toward my neighbor's yard, as if checking something, then returned its gaze to me. That small movement broke my paralysis. I turned away, keeping my movements slow and deliberate. I didn't scream. I didn't run. Some primal part of my brain told me that would be the worst thing to do. Instead, I actually whispered to this thing, "Please, leave me alone." I don't know why I said that. It just came out. I lay there, facing away from the window for what felt like hours. Eventually, I gathered enough courage to look back. The window was empty, just darkness and the faint glow from the yard light. I convinced myself it was stress, or maybe I was half asleep and dreaming, but I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat up in my bed back against the headboard, staring at that gap in the curtains until dawn. The next day, I went to work like nothing happened. I even laughed about it with myself during lunch. Sleep paralysis, that's all it was. Stress and an overactive imagination. But then it happened again the next night. Same time, around 11:30. Same position, same eyes looking in through that gap in the curtains, the exact same spot. That's what freaked me out the most. The precision of it, like it knew exactly where to stand to be seen through that tiny gap. This time, I didn't look away. I stared back. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. But I stared back. After maybe 30 seconds, though it felt like forever, it simply withdrew from the window. Not quickly like it was startled, but slowly, deliberately. On the third night, I was prepared. I kept all the lights off in my bedroom and sat on the floor against the wall opposite the window. At 11:28, I was watching the clock. I saw the shadow appear again. Same spot, same position. leaning down to look through that gap. This time, since the room was dark and I wasn't in bed, it seemed confused. Its head tilted slightly, like a dog trying to understand a strange sound. That's when I decided I'd had enough. As soon as it left, I covered every inch of my windows with aluminum foil, every single window in the house. I didn't care what the neighbors thought. I didn't care that my house looked like some conspiracy theorist's bunker. I needed to feel safe. The foil worked in a way. I didn't see it again through the windows. But 3 nights later, around the same time, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping on my bedroom window. Tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 pause. Like it was trying to get my attention, like it knew I was there, hiding. This continued every few nights, not every night, which somehow made it worse. The unpredictability kept me constantly on edge. Sometimes 3 nights would pass with nothing, and I'd start to relax, thinking maybe it had moved on. Then the tapping would return. About a week after the first sighting, I was in my kitchen making a late dinner. It was around 10 at night. The kitchen window faces the same backyard as my bedroom. Suddenly, the motion-activated light outside flared to life. Through the foil-covered window, I could see the brightness increase in the room. Against my better judgment, I peeled back a corner of the foil and looked out. That's when I saw the legs. Just the lower half, but unmistakably not human. Thick, covered in dark hair, moving past my window. They paused briefly, as if the owner knew I was watching, then continued into the darkness beyond the reach of my yard light. I called the police the next day. The officer who came out was polite but skeptical. He checked around the house, found some unusual tracks that he said were probably from a bear, and advised me to make sure my trash cans were secure. A bear. Right. Bears don't tap on windows in patterns or stare into your eyes with intelligence. The worst incident happened in early March. I have a yellow lab named Rex. He's getting old now, 12 years, but he's still active and loves to patrol the yard. That evening, I let him out to do his business before bed. Usually, he's back scratching at the door within 5 minutes. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I called for him from the back door, but no response. The motion light was on, which was strange because Rex was nowhere in sight. I grabbed a flashlight and my phone and reluctantly stepped outside. I called for him repeatedly as I moved toward the tree line. That's when I heard a faint whining coming from near the edge of the woods. I followed the sound and found Rex lying on his side, completely immobilized. As I got closer, I realized what was wrong. 3 small saplings, young, flexible trees about as thick as my thumb, had been woven through his collar, not accidentally caught, woven, deliberately manipulated in a way that secured him to the ground. He couldn't move more than a few inches in any direction without choking himself. It took me almost an hour to free him. I had to use my pocket knife to carefully cut through the saplings without hurting Rex. The entire time, I felt exposed, watched. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see that face staring at me from the darkness. Rex was physically unhurt but shaken. He hasn't been the same since. He refuses to go out in the yard after dark now. He'll hold it all night if he has to, and sometimes, for no apparent reason, he'll stare at the back windows and growl low in his throat. I've started sleeping in the living room. My bedroom feels tainted somehow. I've considered moving, but the housing market is terrible. And honestly, I'm not convinced it wouldn't follow me. That's the most terrifying part. The sense that this thing has chosen me specifically, that it's studying me, learning my patterns, waiting for something. 2 weeks ago, I installed security cameras covering every approach to the house. So far, they've captured nothing unusual, which almost makes it worse. Either this thing knows where the cameras are and is avoiding them, or I'm losing my mind. But I know what I saw. I know those eyes were real. I know something intelligent was looking at me through my something that doesn't belong in our world. At least not the world as I understood it before February. Last night, I woke up at exactly 3:17 in the morning, not to a sound or a sight, but to a smell, a musky, wild odor that somehow filled my living room despite all windows and doors being closed and locked. It was strongest near the foil-covered front window, and for just a moment I swear I heard breathing on the other side of the wall. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it chose my house, my window, me, but I can feel it's still out there waiting. Sometimes I catch myself looking for that silhouette again, that massive head leaning down to peer inside. Part of me almost wants to see it, to confirm I'm not crazy, but mostly I just want it to leave me alone. I still whisper that sometimes, into the darkness of my house, please leave me alone. So far it hasn't listened. Story 13. I've been hesitant to share this for a long time, but after what happened to us last summer at North Battle Creek, I can't stop thinking about it. My wife Eleanor and I have been retired for about 3 years now, and we'd been planning this camping trip for months. We're both in our mid-60s, and we'd fished at North Battle Creek in Northern California plenty of times over the years, but we'd never actually camped overnight there. Always just day trips. This time, we reserved a lakeside campsite for a full week in mid-July 2022, and I was really looking forward to some extended fishing time. The drive up was beautiful. It was a perfectly clear day, and as we descended into the valley where the lake sits, I jokingly said to Eleanor, "Welcome to Sasquatch Valley, honey." I had no idea how those words would come back to haunt me. We arrived on Sunday and set up our camp. There were a few other groups scattered around the lake, maybe 4 or 5 in total. Nothing unusual that first night. We had a campfire, made some s'mores and turned in early. I was eager to get up before dawn to catch the morning bite. By Monday afternoon, most of the weekend campers had packed up and left. Only us and one other group remained, a young couple with a toddler about half a mile down the shoreline. The solitude was exactly what we'd hoped for. Monday night was peaceful, just the sounds of crickets and the occasional splash from fish jumping in the lake. Tuesday morning is when things started to get weird. I got up around 5 in the morning like I'd planned. It was still dark, with just a hint of light on the horizon. The lake was dead calm, like glass. I grabbed my tackle box and rod and headed down to the shore. I was standing there, getting ready to cast, when I heard it. At first, I thought it was someone yelling from across the lake. It was this long, drawn-out howl that echoed across the water. But it didn't sound human. It wasn't a wolf or a coyote either. I know those sounds. This was different. It was deeper, more guttural, almost like a roar, but with this weird, almost human-like quality to it. The hair on my arms stood up immediately. The sound came from the west side of the lake. Then, maybe 2 minutes later, I heard another call. This time from the north, then another from the east. Whatever was making these sounds was moving around the perimeter of the lake, and fast. Too fast for a person to be running between those points. In total, I heard about 10 different vocalizations over the course of maybe 15 minutes. They seemed to be answering each other, like they were communicating. By this point, I was seriously unsettled. I reeled in my line and went back to wake Eleanor. When I told her what I'd heard, she suggested it might have been those Black Angus cows we'd seen grazing on the way in. I almost wished she was right, but I know what cows sound like. These weren't cows. Not even close. I tried to put it out of my mind and went back to fishing later that morning, but I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. Every time I looked up from the water, I'd scan the tree line, half expecting to see something staring back at me. But there was nothing, at least nothing I could see. That evening, something strange happened. The other camping group, the young family, suddenly packed up and left. It was around 7 p.m., and they were in a real hurry. They didn't even properly douse their campfire. I had to walk over and put it out myself after they tore out of there. I wondered if they'd heard the sounds too. Our son Trevor was supposed to join us the next day. He's in his 30s and lives about 3 hours away. I almost called to tell him not to come, but Eleanor thought I was overreacting. It was probably just some kind of animal, she said. This is their territory after all. Trevor arrived Wednesday afternoon with his little terrier, Max. We didn't mention the strange sounds. I didn't want to spook him, and honestly, I was trying to convince myself it was nothing to worry about. We had a nice dinner, caught up on family stuff, and played some cards. Trevor set up his small one-person tent about 20 feet from our larger one. Everything seemed fine until we all turned in for the night. I woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of Max growling. It was a low, continuous growl, the kind dogs make when they're truly scared, not just alerting to something ordinary. I nudged Eleanor awake, and we listened. That's when we heard the footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps circling Trevor's tent, 2-legged footsteps. Not the 4-legged gait of a bear or deer. Whatever it was big, and it was walking upright. I grabbed my flashlight and was about to unzip our tent when Eleanor grabbed my arm. "Don't," she whispered. "Just listen." We could hear Trevor's voice now, trying to calm Max, who was absolutely losing it, shaking, whimpering and growling all at once. The footsteps continued around his tent, then slowly moved away. Everything went quiet for maybe half an hour, then they came back, same pattern, circling the tent 3 times before moving off again. This happened 3 separate times throughout the night. Around 4 a.m., I heard Trevor's tent unzip and saw the beam of his small reading light sweep across the campsite. I was about to call out to him when I heard the footsteps again, this time moving rapidly away from the light. Trevor called out, "Hello, is someone there?" but got no response. I finally dozed off near dawn and woke up around 7. When I emerged from our tent, Trevor was already up, looking exhausted and on edge. His face was pale, and he kept glancing at the surrounding forest. "Dad," he said quietly when Eleanor was out of earshot, "something was out there last night. Something big." "I know," I admitted. "We heard it too." "It circled my tent 3 different times," he said. Max was terrified. And the weird thing is, when I turned on my light, I could hear it moving away, but I couldn't see anything. It was like it could see me, but I couldn't see it. We searched the area around his tent for tracks. The ground was mostly covered with pine needles, but in one soft patch of dirt, we found some deer tracks. Trevor looked at me skeptically. "That wasn't a deer, Dad. Deer don't walk on 2 legs, and they don't circle a tent 3 times. And deer move quietly. This thing, I could hear every footstep." "Maybe a bear?" Eleanor suggested when she joined us. I shook my head. "A bear would have gone for our food cooler, not circled a tent repeatedly, and bears don't usually walk exclusively on their hind legs for that long." Trevor wanted to leave immediately, but I convinced him to stay for breakfast at least. As we sat there eating in silence, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being observed from the tree line behind our campsite. Every few minutes, one of us would glance nervously in that direction. After breakfast, Trevor packed up. "I'm not staying another night, Dad. Something's not right here." Part of me wanted to pack up too, but I'm stubborn. We'd planned this trip for months, and we'd paid for the full week. Plus, I didn't want to seem like a scared old man in front of my son, so I told him we'd stay, but we'd be careful. As Trevor was loading his car, he said something that chilled me. "You know what it reminds me of? Those Bigfoot stories Uncle Jim used to tell us when we'd go camping when I was a kid." I laughed it off, but as soon as he drove away, I turned to Eleanor. "Maybe we should go too." But she was as stubborn as me. "Martin, we're not letting some animal scare us away. It was probably just curious about us. If it wanted to hurt us, it would have by now." She had a point, I guess, but that night we didn't have a campfire. We stayed in our tent as soon as the sun went down. I kept my hunting knife and flashlight right next to me. Neither of us slept much. Around 1 in the morning, the sounds started again. Those same howls or yells I'd heard that Tuesday morning, but closer now, much closer. And this time, they were answered by similar calls from the opposite side of the lake. Whatever these things were, they were communicating with each other, and they were surrounding us. I'll never forget Eleanor's face in the dim light of our lantern. For the first time, she looked truly frightened. "Martin, that's not an animal I've ever heard before." "I know," I whispered. Then we heard the footsteps again, slow, deliberate, circling our tent just like they had circled Trevor's. The ground actually vibrated slightly with each step. Whatever this thing was, it was massive. It circled 3 times, pausing occasionally as if listening or smelling. Then it moved away toward the lake. We could hear branches snapping as it moved through the underbrush. We didn't sleep at all that night. At first light, we packed up everything in record time and were on the road by 6 a.m. We didn't even make coffee. As we drove out of the valley, I kept checking the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see something emerge from the tree line behind us. Eleanor was quiet for most of the drive home, but finally she said, "I don't think we should tell anyone about this." But that night, I couldn't help myself. I got on the computer and started searching for strange animal sounds in Northern California. And that's when I found the Bigfoot recordings. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I played them. They matched exactly what we'd heard. I dug deeper and found reports from other campers who'd had similar experiences in that same area. One report from 2020 mentioned the same circling behavior around tents. Another described the call and response vocalizations from different points around the lake. I've been camping and fishing my whole life. I'm not some city person who gets spooked by normal forest sounds. What we experienced at North Battle Creek wasn't normal. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a mountain lion, and it sure as hell wasn't a cow or deer. I don't know what to think anymore. I've always been skeptical about Bigfoot stories, but after what we experienced, I just don't know. All I know for sure is that I'm never camping at North Battle Creek again, and every time I hear a branch snap outside our house at night, I find myself holding my breath, listening for those heavy, 2-legged footsteps. Story 14. I still get chills typing this out. Even though it happened almost 3 months ago, I find myself waking up in cold sweats some nights, heart racing, ears straining to make sure I don't hear that sound again. My boyfriend Jake and I had been planning this camping trip for weeks. We both work office jobs in Portland and desperately needed to disconnect and spend some time in nature. We found this beautiful secluded spot about 2 hours east in the Mount Hood National Forest area. It wasn't an official campground, just a little clearing off a Forest Service road that Jake's brother had told him about. The kind of place where you might not see another human for days. We arrived around 3 in the afternoon on a Friday. The weather was perfect. Not too hot, not too cold. That sweet spot in late September when summer is fading, but it's not quite fall yet. We set up our tent, gathered firewood, and spent the afternoon hiking around the area. Everything felt so peaceful. I remember noticing something weird on our way back to camp around 6 that evening. There was this pile of something on the dirt road, maybe a quarter mile from our site. It looked like someone had dumped a bucket of purple-black sludge. When we got closer, I realized it was what looked like digested blackberries, this massive pile of purplish-black seedy mush. It was weird because it definitely hadn't been there when we drove in a few hours earlier. "That's gross," Jake said, stepping around it. "Probably a bear. They love berries this time of year." I nodded, but something about it felt off. The pile was huge, way bigger than what I'd expect from a bear, but I didn't think much more about it. We were having such a good time, and nothing was going to ruin our weekend. After dinner, we got a nice campfire going. The sun had set completely by 8:30, and the forest around us was pitch black except for our fire. We were drinking some beers, looking at the stars, talking about all the normal stuff couples talk about, work drama, future plans, that show we'd been binging. Everything was perfect until it wasn't. It was almost 10 o'clock. I remember checking my phone right before it happened, thinking we should probably turn in soon. That's when we heard it. The sound started so suddenly, it made me gasp. It was this high-pitched scream that didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard before. It had this weird rhythm to it, almost like a siren, but it was clearly coming from something living. The scream would rise in pitch, hold for a few seconds, then drop slightly before rising again, over and over. The worst part, I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. It seemed to be everywhere, in front of us, behind us, to the sides. The sound bounced between the trees in a way that made it impossible to pinpoint. Jake and I just froze. I remember our eyes locking across the fire, both of us with this "what the fuck" expression. My skin was instantly covered in goosebumps, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck standing up. We sat there paralyzed for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. That's when we realized the screaming was getting louder. Whatever was making that sound was getting closer to our camp, the truck dot. Jake's voice was barely a whisper, but it broke the spell. We both jumped up and ran to our pickup, which was maybe 20 feet from where we'd been sitting. I've never moved so fast in my life. We didn't grab anything, not our chairs, not our drinks, nothing. We just ran. Jake fumbled with the keys for what felt like an eternity, while the screaming grew even louder. When we finally got in, he locked all the doors immediately. I was shaking so hard I could barely breathe. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, afraid that whatever was out there might hear me through the closed windows. "I don't know," Jake said. His face was pale in the dim light from the dashboard, but "I don't like it." The screaming was getting closer. It seemed to circle our campsite, moving through the trees around us. Jake started honking the horn, pressing it in long, loud blasts. I remember thinking it was so loud, it hurt my ears inside the truck. I can't imagine how loud it was outside. The honking seemed to work, at least partially. The screaming continued, but it started moving away from us rather than toward us. We sat there in the truck, hearts pounding, listening as the sound gradually grew fainter. After about 10 minutes, when the screaming had moved far enough away that it was just barely audible, Jake turned to me. "We should pack up now, while it's away." I nodded, but the thought of getting out of the truck made my stomach turn. What if it comes back? "We'll be quick." And at the first sign of it returning, we jumped back in the truck. So that's what we did. We got out and the cool night air made me shiver, or maybe it was fear. We started frantically throwing our stuff into bags, not caring about organization or cleanliness. Jake kicked dirt onto the fire to put it out while I took down the tent, barely folding it before shoving it into its bag. We worked in near silence, both of us constantly pausing to listen. Twice, the screaming seemed to get louder again, and we ran back to the truck, locking ourselves in until it faded once more. At 11:45, we were finally driving away. I remember checking the time as we pulled onto the main Forest Service road, my hands still shaking. The screaming had completely stopped by then, but neither of us suggested staying. We just wanted to get the hell out of there. The drive home was tense. We tried to talk about what we'd heard, but neither of us had any real explanation. Jake kept suggesting it could have been a mountain lion or maybe even an elk. They can make some pretty weird sounds during mating season, but I knew it wasn't either of those. I'd heard recordings of both, and this was something completely different. We got back to Portland around 1:30 in the morning. Even though we were exhausted, neither of us could sleep. We kept the lights on and the TV running until dawn finally broke. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what we'd heard. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch. I started researching strange animal sounds in the Pacific Northwest, watching videos and listening to recordings. That's when I found it. There were these recordings from Washington State from 1978. They were labeled as possible Sasquatch vocalizations on this cryptozoology website. I played them without expecting much. I wasn't even a believer in Bigfoot or anything like that. But when I heard those recordings, my blood went cold. It was exactly what we had heard, the same high-pitched rhythmic screaming with that siren-like quality, the same pattern of rising and falling. It was like listening to a recording of our own experience. I called Jake over immediately, and when he heard it, his face went white. "That's it," he whispered. "That's exactly what we heard." Then I remembered the pile of digested blackberries we'd seen on the road. I started researching Sasquatch sightings and found multiple accounts of people finding similar piles of scat near areas with reported activity. Apparently, they love berries and fruits, and their digestive systems process them quickly, leaving behind distinctive piles of partially digested fruit pulp and seeds. Everything started connecting in my mind. The unexplained berry scat that appeared suddenly on a road where no one had been, the terrifying vocalizations that matched decades-old recordings of supposed Sasquatch sounds, the way the creature seemed to circle our camp but stayed just out of sight in the darkness. I've never been one to believe in cryptids or monsters or anything like that. I've always been firmly grounded in reality, but what happened that night and everything I've discovered since has shaken that foundation. I haven't told many people about this. Jake and I have barely spoken about it since that night, except to agree that we're not camping in that area again. When friends ask how our trip was, we just say it was cut short by bad weather or some other excuse. But I know what I heard. I know what we experienced. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I find myself scrolling through forums like this one, reading other people's experiences, looking for answers. Has anyone else heard something like this? Has anyone else encountered whatever was screaming in those woods that night? Because 3 months later, I still can't explain it. And I'm not sure I want to know what would have happened if we hadn't gotten in that truck when we did. Story 15. I've been debating whether to post this for a long time. It's been over 9 years now, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I've only told a few close friends and family members because honestly, who would believe me? But I need to get this off my chest. And maybe someone here has experienced something similar. Back in September of 2014, my buddy Tyler and I decided to do a 3-night backpacking trip in Manistee National Forest in western Michigan. We'd been friends since high school and tried to do at least one outdoor adventure every year. Both of us were experienced hikers, not experts by any means, but we knew what we were doing. We'd mapped out this loop trail that would take us deep into the backcountry. The weather was perfect, cool but not cold, and we were excited to get away from work and people for a few days. The first night was completely normal. We hiked about 7 miles in, set up camp near this little creek just off the main trail. We cooked dinner on my little camp stove, had a few beers, talked about work and life, normal stuff. The woods were peaceful, just the usual sounds of birds, the creek bubbling, leaves rustling. We crashed around 11 and slept great. The next morning, we packed up and continued on the trail. That's when things started to feel different. The trail got narrower, less maintained. You could tell not many people came this far in. By mid-afternoon, we'd hiked another 8 or 9 miles, and the forest had changed. The trees were older, bigger, more densely packed. There was this heaviness to the air that's hard to explain, like the forest was watching us. We found a small clearing to set up camp around 4 in the afternoon. It was surrounded by these massive old-growth trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. Tyler joked that it looked like something out of Blair Witch, but we laughed it off. We set up the tent, gathered firewood, and got a small fire going. Everything was still normal at this point, but I remember feeling, I don't know, like we weren't alone. I brushed it off as just being in unfamiliar territory. After dinner, we were sitting by the fire, and that's when we first heard it. It was maybe around 8:30 or 9, and getting dark fast. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then Tyler grabbed my arm and whispered, "Do you hear that?" It sounded like voices, but not normal voices. They were slow, dragged out, almost like someone playing a tape at half speed. They were distant, maybe a couple hundred yards away, but clear enough that we could tell they weren't normal. It wasn't just one voice either. It sounded like there were at least 2 or 3 different whatever they were. "What the hell is that?" Tyler whispered. I remember my mouth going completely dry. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe other campers, maybe the wind playing tricks, maybe some kind of bird or animal I wasn't familiar with. But deep down, I knew it wasn't any of those things. These sounds were trying to be human voices, but they weren't quite right. The voices continued on and off for about 20 minutes, never getting closer but never going away either. They had this rhythm to them, almost like a conversation, but slowed way down and with this guttural quality that made the hair on my arms stand up. Then silence. Complete silence. Even the normal forest sounds, insects, leaves rustling, all stopped. That's when we heard the crack. It wasn't like a twig snapping under someone's foot. It was loud, like something had broken a tree branch as thick as my thigh. The sound echoed through the forest, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Tyler and I just looked at each other, and I could see the same fear in his eyes that I was feeling. "We should get in the tent," he said quietly. I nodded, and we quickly doused the fire and grabbed our stuff. Inside the tent, we whispered about what to do. Tyler wanted to pack up and leave right then, but it was already dark, and I thought hiking out at night would be more dangerous than staying put. So we decided to tough it out until morning, then cut our trip short. Neither of us slept that night. The voices never returned, but throughout the night we heard movement around our campsite. Heavy footsteps circling our tent, but always staying just far enough away that we couldn't see anything when we used our flashlights. There were occasional snapping sounds, rustling in the underbrush, and this weird huffing noise, like really heavy breathing from something large. Around 3 in the morning, something brushed against our tent, not hard, just enough to make the fabric move. I nearly had a heart attack. Tyler and I were frozen, barely breathing, clutching our pocket knives. Fat lot of good those would do. Whatever it was, moved away after a few seconds, but the footsteps and noises continued until dawn. As soon as there was enough light to see, we packed up as fast as we've ever packed in our lives. We didn't even make coffee or breakfast, just stuffed everything in our packs and got ready to go. That's when Tyler pointed to the ground about 20 feet from our tent. "Look at that," he said, his voice shaking. There, pressed into the soft dirt, was a footprint, but not a human footprint. It was huge, easily 15 inches long, and shaped like a bare human foot, but wider, with what looked like claws or really long toes at the end. My stomach dropped to my feet. I wanted to convince myself it was a bear print, but I've seen bear prints, and this wasn't one. "We need to go." "Now," I said, and Tyler didn't argue. We shouldered our packs and started hiking back toward the trailhead as fast as we could. We'd been going for maybe 15 minutes when we heard it, heavy footsteps behind us, matching our pace, but staying just out of sight. Whenever we stopped, the steps stopped too, with almost no delay. Whatever was following us was smart enough to know we were listening. The huffing sounds started again, deep, deep, rhythmic breathing that no human could make. It was following us, stalking us. We picked up our pace, almost jogging now, our heavy packs bouncing uncomfortably. That's when I made the mistake of looking back. Through the trees, maybe 50 yards back, I saw movement. A dark shape, tall, way taller than a person, moving smoothly between the trees. It was just a glimpse, but it was enough to see that it was walking upright on 2 legs, with long arms that hung down past its knees. "Run," I said to Tyler, my voice barely a whisper. "Don't look back, just run." We ran as best we could with 30-pound packs. The thing behind us started moving faster too, crashing through the underbrush now, not even trying to be quiet anymore. The sound of breaking branches and heavy footfalls was getting closer. Then it roared. I've never heard anything like it in my life. It wasn't a bear or a cougar or any animal I've ever heard. It was deep and powerful and angry, and it shook the trees around us. My legs nearly gave out from pure terror. In that moment, survival instinct took over. We dropped our packs right there on the trail, just shrugged them off and left them. Without the weight, we could run faster, and we did. We sprinted down that trail like our lives depended on it, because I truly believe they did. The creature stayed with us, paralleling the trail through the woods. I could hear it moving, sometimes catching glimpses of dark fur through the trees. It followed us for what felt like forever, but was probably just under a mile. The trail widened, and we could see the parking area ahead. We were gasping for breath, legs burning, but we didn't slow down. As we approached the clearing where the parking lot was, the crashing sounds behind us stopped. Against my better judgment, I turned to look, and there it was, standing at the tree line maybe 100 yards back. It was huge, 7, maybe 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown or black hair. It had wide shoulders, long arms, and a head that seemed to sit directly on those shoulders, without much of a neck. Its face was... God! I still have nightmares about that face. It wasn't human, but it wasn't animal either. And its mouth was open, showing teeth. We didn't stop running until we reached my car. We jumped in and locked the doors, and I started the engine with shaking hands. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I looked in the rearview mirror, but the tree line was empty. The thing was gone. We drove straight back to Grand Rapids without saying much. What was there to say? We both knew what we'd seen, but neither of us wanted to put it into words. 2 days later, after much debate, we went back for our gear. We brought Tyler's dad's shotgun, and 2 other friends came with us. Safety in numbers, we figured. The hike back to where we'd dropped our packs took about an hour, but when we got there, I almost wished we hadn't come. Our packs were there, but they'd been ripped apart, literally shredded. The sleeping bags had been pulled out and torn open, our food containers crushed, clothes scattered everywhere. The whole area stank like wet hair and rot. A smell so strong it made me gag, and there were tracks all around. The same huge footprints we'd seen before, dozens of them, circling what had been our campsite and then leading off into the deeper forest. We grabbed what we could salvage, which wasn't much, and got the hell out of there. I've never been back to Manistee National Forest, and I never will. I know what people will say. It was a bear, it was our imagination, it was other hikers playing tricks. But I know what I saw, I know what followed us, I know what made those tracks and tore apart our gear. There's something in those woods that shouldn't exist, but it does, and it didn't want us there. Sometimes I still wake up hearing that roar, feeling those footsteps shaking the ground behind me 9 years later, and I still can't explain what happened that day in the forest. Story 16. I've been a deer hunter all my life, 23 years stalking the woods of Pennsylvania, and I've seen just about everything you'd expect. Coyotes, black bears, bobcats, you name it. But what happened to me in the Allegheny National Forest back in November of 2011 still gives me cold sweats when I think about it. It was the second week of rifle season. The weather had been unusually warm that year, which meant the deer weren't moving like they normally would. I decided to head to a ridge I'd hunted for years, about 8 miles from the nearest paved road. My spot was this little outcropping that overlooked a natural funnel where deer would cross between feeding and bedding areas. I remember getting to my parking spot while it was still dark, around 5:30 in the morning. The forest was dead quiet that day. No wind, no birds, nothing. Just that heavy silence that sometimes settles in the woods. I didn't think much of it then. Wish I had. I hiked in about 2 miles to my ridge, taking my time, being careful not to make noise. Got settled in just as the sky was lightening up. I had my .30-06 Remington, a thermos of coffee, and some beef jerky, planning to sit all day if I needed to. Morning dragged on with no deer movement. By around 10, I was getting stiff and bored. The temperature had climbed to the mid-50s, and I figured the deer might be holding tight in the thicker cover down in the hollow below my ridge. There was a game trail I knew about that cut through that area, so I decided to slip down there and check it out, maybe bump something up. The hollow was about 100 yards below my position, a shadowy crease in the land filled with mountain laurel thickets and fallen timber. As I started making my way down, I noticed how the forest had gotten even quieter, that unnatural kind of quiet that makes the hair on your neck stand up. No squirrels chattering, no juncos flitting around in the underbrush. Nothing. I remember checking my watch. It was 10:23, and thinking maybe I should turn back. But I kept going, figuring I'd just take a quick look at the trail for fresh sign and head back up if I didn't see anything promising. When I got about halfway down to the hollow, I started feeling, I don't know how to describe it exactly, like I was being watched. Every hunter knows that feeling. But this was different, more intense. My chest got tight, and I felt my heartbeat pick up. I tried telling myself it was just buck fever, anticipation, but deep down I knew it wasn't. I slowed my pace, moving more deliberately, scanning the woods ahead. The brush was getting thicker, and visibility was dropping to maybe 30 or 40 yards in places. I was about 60 yards from the bottom of the hollow when I heard it. A growl. Not like a bear's warning growl or a bobcat. This was deep, almost subsonic. I felt it in my chest as much as heard it. It came from about 30 yards ahead, down in the thickest part of the hollow. My first thought was bear, but it didn't sound right. I've been around black bears my whole life, and this wasn't that. I froze, rifle halfway up to my shoulder, trying to spot movement in the tangle of laurel ahead. That's when I heard the second growl, this time from my right, maybe 25 yards away. My mouth went completely dry. The realization that I was hearing two separate animals hit me like a punch to the gut. I started backing up, slow and steady, keeping my eyes moving between where the sounds had come from. That's when I saw it. To my left, behind a massive white oak, something moved. At first, I just caught a glimpse of dark hair, thinking maybe a bear. But then it shifted position, and I realized I was looking at something standing upright behind that tree, and it was using the tree as cover, deliberately keeping it between us. I can't really explain how wrong that felt. Animals don't use cover tactically like that. They hide or they run or they charge. They don't position themselves with purpose. Whatever was behind that tree was huge, wider than the trunk it was using for cover, and the trunk had to be at least 30 inches across, and tall. God, it was tall. The oak was probably 60 feet high, and this thing's head was a good quarter of the way up it. 7, maybe 8 feet. I was still backing up, one slow step at a time, when movement caught my eye from the right, where the second growl had come from. Another one, same size, maybe bigger, also standing behind a tree, also using it as cover. Dark hair covering its body. Arms hanging down, arms that were way too long, reaching almost to its knees. They were flanking me, working together. I could see them moving from tree to tree, always keeping something between us but getting closer. The way they moved was all wrong. Smooth but heavy, like athletes who weighed 500 pounds. Then they both growled at the same time. It wasn't just the sound, it was like I could feel it vibrating in my bones. That's when I broke. I turned and started scrambling back up the ridge as fast as I could, not running exactly. The ground was too steep and rough for that, but moving a hell of a lot faster than I'd come down. I kept waiting to feel hands on my back or hear them right behind me. My heart was hammering so hard, I thought I might have a heart attack right there. I made it about halfway up when I spotted a big outcropping of rock. I ducked behind it, trying to catch my breath, and brought my rifle up. For what felt like forever, I just sat there, listening, watching the woods below me. I couldn't see them anymore, but I had this overwhelming feeling they were still there, watching, waiting. I'd feel these occasional waves of, I guess dread is the closest word, like something in my brain was picking up on their presence, even if my eyes couldn't see them. After maybe 20 minutes of this, I decided I needed to move. I worked my way around the ridge rather than going back the way I'd come in. It added at least a mile to my hike out, but there was no way in hell I was going back down into that hollow. The whole time I was hiking out, I kept checking over my shoulder, scanning the trees around me. My hands were shaking so badly I had to stop once and just press them against a tree trunk to steady myself. I've been in some scary situations, almost fell off a cliff once hunting, had a close call with a mama bear and cubs. But nothing like this. This was primal fear, the kind that makes you feel like a prey animal. I made it back to my truck around noon. I remember sitting in the driver's seat with the doors locked for a long time, just staring at the woods. I was trying to process what I'd seen, trying to make it fit into my understanding of the world. What I saw weren't bears. They weren't men in suits. They moved with too much purpose for animals, but had a wild quality no human could mimic. Their proportions were all wrong. Too tall, too wide through the shoulders and chest, arms too long. And the way they worked together, positioning themselves, using the trees as cover. It was intelligent, tactical. I've gone back and forth 100 times trying to explain it away, but I know what I saw. 2 Bigfoot Sasquatch, whatever you want to call them, working as a team to intimidate me out of their territory. The thing that still gets me, that I still can't shake, is how deliberate it all felt. They weren't trying to attack me. They could have, easily. I was alone, vulnerable. But they were sending a message. Get out. This is our place, not yours. I haven't been back to that part of the forest since. I still hunt, but never alone, and never in that area. I've told this story to exactly 3 people before now. My brother, my best friend, and my wife. My brother thinks I saw bears. My friend believes me. My wife just worries. I don't care if people believe me or not anymore. I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that there are things in those woods that aren't supposed to exist. Things that are smart, coordinated, and very, very territorial. And they let me leave that day, which is something I try not to think about too much, because it means they chose to let me go. Sometimes I still wake up hearing those growls, that deep, chest-vibrating sound that wasn't quite animal, wasn't quite human. And I wonder if they're still there, watching other hunters from behind trees, deciding whether to send them away or something else. Story 17. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that summer. It was 2008, and I was 12 years old, living in a small town outside Monongahela in western Pennsylvania. My parents were pretty relaxed about letting me explore as long as I was home before dark, and I spent most of that summer riding my bike through the woods near our house. There was this old abandoned railroad bed that cut through the forest behind our neighborhood. It was my favorite place to ride because it was flat and smooth compared to the hiking trails, and it ran alongside this small creek that was always cool even on the hottest days. The railroad hadn't been used in decades. The tracks were gone, but the raised gravel bed was still there, creating this perfect path through the woods. On this particular day in late July, I remember it being really humid, the kind of sticky heat where your shirt clings to your back within minutes of being outside. I'd packed a sandwich and a bottle of water in my backpack and headed out around noon, planning to ride to the end of the trail and back. The first part of my ride was completely normal. I passed a few people walking their dogs near the entrance of the trail, but once I got deeper into the woods, it was usually pretty deserted. I liked that. Just me, my bike, and the sounds of the forest. The path curved gently through the trees, with the creek bubbling along beside it. The railroad bed was raised about 4 feet above the surrounding forest floor, giving me a good view of the woods on either side. I'd been riding for maybe 45 minutes when I heard the sound of a small engine coming toward me. I pulled to the side of the path, and 2 kids on this beat-up dirt bike came flying around the bend. They were probably teenagers, both crammed onto this tiny motorcycle that sounded like a lawnmower. As they zoomed past me, one of them yelled something that I didn't fully catch, something about getting chased or being followed. I figured they were just messing around or running from a park ranger for riding a motorized vehicle on the trail. After they disappeared around the curve behind me, I continued on my way, pedaling at a steady pace. The woods seemed quieter after they passed, like all the birds had stopped singing at once. I didn't think much of it at first. About 10 minutes later, I was rounding a bend where the creek curved away from the path, creating this small clearing on my right side. There was a stand of younger trees there, not the big old oaks that dominated most of the forest, but thinner trees with lots of underbrush between them. Something caught my eye, movement where there shouldn't have been any. At first, I thought someone was crouching behind the brush, maybe a hunter, even though it wasn't hunting season, or just another kid playing in the woods. I slowed down, curious but not alarmed. From the railroad bed, I was looking slightly down at whatever was there, maybe 30 feet away. I stopped my bike and squinted, trying to make out what I was seeing through the leaves and branches. That's when it stood up. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing at first. The shape just kept rising and rising. What I had thought was a person crouching turned out to be just the upper part of something that was partially hidden by the brush. As it straightened to its full height, I realized with a jolt of fear that its waist was level with the top of the railroad bed where I was standing. The railroad bed was at least 4 feet above the ground. It was covered in dark brown hair. Not fur exactly, but hair that moved slightly in the breeze. Not like a costume, but like actual hair growing from skin. The body was thick and muscular, with shoulders that seemed impossibly wide. Its arms were long, too long, hanging down past where its knees would be. The head looked almost small compared to the massive shoulders, but it was still bigger than a human head, with a sort of sloped forehead. I couldn't make out its face clearly from that distance, but I remember its eyes caught the sunlight in a way that made them flash. Not like an animal's eyes reflecting light at night, but something different, like they were deep set, but still caught the light in a way that human eyes don't. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. I was completely frozen. Then it moved again. It raised its right arm and grabbed onto the trunk of a nearby tree. A tree that was probably 6 inches thick. Without seeming to strain at all, it made this low grunting sound and shook the entire tree. Not violently, but firmly, like someone might shake a fence post to test if it was loose. Leaves showered down around it. That broke my paralysis. I don't remember deciding to move. My body just reacted. I spun my bike around so fast I nearly fell off. And then I was pedaling harder than I'd ever pedaled in my life. My legs burned and my lungs felt like they were going to explode. But I didn't slow down. I didn't look back either. I just kept my eyes on the path ahead and pushed myself to go faster. The trail seemed 10 times longer on the way back. Every curve felt like it took forever to navigate. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, kept imagining that thing running after me along the raised path. The thought made me pedal even harder. When I finally reached the part of the trail that neared the road, maybe a half-mile from where I'd seen the creature, I finally risked a glance back. It was standing on the path where I had been, watching me. Even from that distance, I could tell how massive it was because it stood out clearly against the trees behind it. It was just watching. As I looked, it turned and stepped off the path into the woods, disappearing among the trees with surprising quickness for something so large. I didn't stop until I reached the main road. When I finally did, my legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. I had to sit on the guardrail for almost 10 minutes before I could ride the rest of the way home. I kept looking over my shoulder the entire time, terrified that it had somehow circled around through the woods and was waiting to cut me off. When I got home, I was a mess. My mum took one look at me, pale, sweaty and trembling, and thought I was sick. I didn't tell her what happened. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. Who would believe me? I'd just say I got scared by something in the woods, or that I'd pushed myself too hard riding and felt sick from the heat. For weeks afterward, I had nightmares about those eyes and that casual display of strength, how easily it shook that tree. I avoided the railroad path completely after that. When friends wanted to go ride there, I'd make up excuses or suggest other places. Eventually, the memory faded enough that I could function normally, but I never forgot what I saw. Years later, when I was 18 and about to leave for college, curiosity got the better of me. I went back to that spot on the trail with a tape measure. I'm 6 feet tall now, and standing on the railroad bed, I measured the height from the ground to where my waist was. It came to just over 10 feet total, which means that creature with its waist at railroad bed level had to have been at least 7 to 7.5 feet tall. I've spent countless hours since then researching similar encounters. I've read about Bigfoot sightings all over the country, particularly in the Appalachian region. So many details match what I saw: the height, the proportions, the coloring, the way it moved. I know what I saw wasn't a bear standing on its hind legs, or some guy in a costume playing a prank. The way it moved was too natural, too fluid, and no human could have that build or that height. I've only told a few close friends about this over the years. Most react with skepticism or nervous laughter. One suggested that maybe the 2 kids on the dirt bike had been running from the same thing I encountered. That thought still gives me chills. What if they had a closer call than I did? I haven't been back to that section of the railroad path since taking those measurements. I'm not sure I ever will. Sometimes when I'm hiking or camping in other forests, I catch myself scanning the trees, looking for movement where there shouldn't be any. I listen more carefully to the sounds of the woods going quiet, and I always keep my eyes on the high ground. I never saw it again after that day, but I know what I saw, and sometimes I can't help but wonder if it recognized what I was too. If it was just as surprised to see me as I was to see it, and if somewhere out there it still remembers our encounter as vividly as I do. Story 18. I still don't know what to make of what happened last New Year's Eve. I've gone back and forth about posting this, but I need to get it off my chest. I've always been a rational person. I'm 52, worked the same job at the paper mill for 27 years, raised my son after his mom left, and never been one for ghost stories or anything supernatural. But what my son, Jake, and I saw that night on FM 1997 just outside Marshall changed something in me. It was New Year's Eve, and we were headed to my brother Mike's place at Lake of the Pines for his annual party. Jake was home from college for winter break, and I was looking forward to spending some time with him. He's 20 now, studying engineering at Texas Tech, and growing more independent every day. Having him ride shotgun felt like old times. We left our house in Marshall around 7:30 in the evening. It wasn't completely dark yet, but the sun had set, and that weird twilight was settling in. I remember because Jake was fiddling with the radio, trying to find a station that wasn't playing commercials or New Year's countdowns. "Dad, your truck still has the worst radio reception in East Texas," he said, laughing as he gave up and plugged in his phone instead. We were in my old Ford F-150, the one I've had since Jake was in middle school. It's nothing fancy, but it's reliable. The heater was blasting because it was unusually cold for East Texas, maybe in the high 30s. I remember I was wearing my thick flannel jacket and still feeling chilled. FM 1997 is one of those typical East Texas back roads. 2 lanes, no shoulder in most places, and thick pine forests pressing in on both sides. There weren't many cars out that evening. Most folks were already where they needed to be for the night's celebrations. The headlights cut through the gathering darkness, throwing the trees into sharp relief against the night sky. We'd been driving for about 15 minutes, making small talk about Jake's classes and his girlfriend Melissa, when I first noticed something wasn't right. We were coming around a gentle curve, and my headlights swept across something at the edge of the tree line, maybe 8 feet from the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer. We get plenty of them around here, and they're always darting out in front of cars. But this was much bigger, and it wasn't moving. As we got closer, I instinctively slowed down, not because I was afraid of hitting it, but because something about it made me uneasy. "Dad, what is that?" Jake had stopped mid-sentence about his thermodynamics professor to lean forward in his seat, peering through the windshield. "I don't know," I said, easing off the gas even more. "Looks like someone in a coat or something." But it wasn't someone in a coat. At least, I don't think it was. The figure was kneeling on one knee, facing away from the road, toward the trees. It was covered in what looked like thick, matted brown fur. Not like a fur coat exactly, more like the fur was part of it. The color was a deep, muddy brown that somehow stood out against the darkness of the pines behind it. As we drew closer, now barely crawling along at maybe 10 miles per hour, I could make out broad shoulders, much wider than any human I've ever seen. The head was oddly shaped, not round like a person's, but more elongated, and it sat directly on those massive shoulders with barely any neck visible. Jake and I exchanged glances. I could see my own confusion and unease reflected in his face. "Should we stop?" he asked, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. I considered it for a moment. The thing, and I realized I was already thinking of it as a thing, not a person, hadn't moved at all as we approached. It didn't turn toward our headlights or show any awareness of our presence. "I don't think so," I said finally. Something deep in my gut was telling me to keep driving, to get past this thing as quickly as possible. It wasn't a conscious thought so much as a primal instinct. As we pulled alongside it, now maybe 20 feet away, I got my clearest look. The fur wasn't a coat. It covered the entire figure, from its massive head down to where its body met the ground. One arm, or what I assumed was an arm, was braced against the ground, supporting its weight as it knelt. The other was extended forward, as if reaching for something in the underbrush. I remember thinking how still it was. Not the stillness of someone trying not to move, but an absolute stillness that seemed unnatural, like it was frozen in place or holding its breath. The only movement was a slight rippling of the fur in the cold breeze. "Dad." Jake's voice had a tremor in it that I hadn't heard since he was a little boy afraid of thunderstorms. "I see it," I said, my own voice sounding strange in my ears. Let's just keep going." We passed it, and I resisted the urge to floor the accelerator. Something told me not to show fear, not to react, even though my heart was hammering in my chest. I glanced in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the thing standing, turning toward us, or worse, following us. But it remained exactly as it had been, kneeling and facing the woods. For the next mile or so, Jake and I were silent. The music from his phone continued to play, some upbeat pop song that felt jarringly out of place with what we'd just experienced. Finally, Jake spoke. "What the hell was that?" I shook my head. "I don't know. Maybe someone in a ghillie suit, a hunter or something." Even as I said it, I knew it didn't make sense. No hunter wears a ghillie suit to kneel at the side of a road, and the proportions were all wrong for a human. "It was too big," Jake said, voicing my thoughts. "And who goes hunting on New Year's Eve in the dark?" We spent the rest of the drive to Mike's place trying to come up with rational explanations. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe some teenagers had set up a mannequin or a prop to scare drivers. Maybe it was some kind of art installation, though that seemed unlikely on a rural road in East Texas. By the time we arrived at the lake house, we'd almost convinced ourselves it was nothing unusual, just something with a simple explanation that we couldn't figure out in the moment. We didn't mention it to anyone at the party. Somehow, it felt too strange, too personal to share. The party was the usual affair. Mike's friends from work, some neighbors, plenty of food and drinks. We watched the ball drop at midnight. Everyone cheered and hugged. And for a while, I forgot about what we'd seen. It wasn't until we were driving home, around 2 in the morning, that it came back to me. Jake had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, his head lolling against the window. As we approached the stretch of road where we'd seen the figure, I felt my palms start to sweat despite the cold. I slowed down as we neared the spot, half expecting, dreading, to see it still there. But the roadside was empty. No kneeling figure, no sign that anything had been there at all. I felt a mixture of relief and, strangely, disappointment. Part of me had wanted to see it again, to confirm that I hadn't imagined it or blown it out of proportion in my mind. Jake stirred as I accelerated again. "We pass it," he mumbled, only half awake. "Yeah," I said. "It's gone." He nodded and drifted back to sleep. The next morning, over coffee, Jake brought it up again. "I kept thinking about that thing we saw last night." I nodded. "Me too. I want to go back and check it out in daylight," he said. "See if there's anything there, any sign of what it could have been." Part of me wanted to say no, to just let it go. But my curiosity was as strong as his. "All right," I agreed. After breakfast, we drove back to FM 1997 around 10:30. It was a bright, clear New Year's Day, the kind of crisp winter morning that makes everything look clean and new. We found the curve in the road where we'd seen the figure, identifiable by a distinctive dead pine tree that stood a bit apart from the others. There was nothing there. No footprints in the soft ground, no disturbed vegetation, no fur caught on branches, nothing to indicate that anything unusual had been kneeling at that spot the night before. We walked along the edge of the woods for about 100 yards in each direction, looking for any sign, any clue, but found nothing. "Maybe we were both just tired," Jake suggested, but his tone said he didn't believe that any more than I did. "Maybe," I said, staring at the spot where the figure had been. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched from the dense woods, though I saw nothing when I peered between the trees. We didn't talk much about it after that day. Jake went back to school a week later, and life returned to its normal routine. But I found myself thinking about it often, especially when driving that stretch of road, which I have to do regularly to get to work. I've researched online, looking for similar sightings in the area, but found nothing concrete. There are vague stories about strange creatures in the piney woods, tales of something locals sometimes call the East Texas Bigfoot, but nothing that matches exactly what we saw. I've never been one to believe in the supernatural or cryptids or any of that stuff. I've always thought there's a logical explanation for everything. But what Jake and I saw that New Year's Eve doesn't fit into my understanding of the world. It wasn't a bear. We have black bears in East Texas, but they don't kneel like that, and they're not that big. It wasn't a person in a costume. The proportions were all wrong, and who would sit motionless in the cold for no apparent reason? It's been almost a year now, and I still don't have answers. Sometimes I drive past that spot and pull over, standing where we saw it, looking into the woods and wondering. Jake and I have talked about it a few times on the phone, but neither of us has any new insights. All I know is that something was there that night. Something that doesn't fit into the world as I understood it. And I can't help but wonder if it's still out there, kneeling in some other part of the woods, waiting for something none of us understand. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, some days I'm not sure I believe it myself, but I know what I saw. And I know that the piney woods of East Texas hold secrets deeper and stranger than most people would ever imagine.